Elena Morrison's knees struck frozen ground with a crack that echoed through the blizzard. Her youngest son lay motionless in her arms, lips the color of winter sky, chest still as stone. The scream tore from her throat, raw and primal. Please, somebody help me. But Coulter Springs, Texas had already made its choice. Every door locked, every window dark, every soul inside pretending not to hear a mother's prayer dissolving into the howling wind. What happened next would shatter everything Elena believed about mercy, about human decency, about the broken man watching from the ridge above with a spyglass pressed to his eye and grief carved into his face like scripture. 2 weeks earlier, the whiskey bottle exploded against the cabin wall 3 inches from Elena's temple. Glass shards glittered in the firelight like fallen stars. You worthless woman. Marcus Morrison's words slurred together, vowels bleeding into consonants. Can't even keep a fire going proper. Elena didn't flinch anymore. 6 years of marriage had taught her the mathematics of survival. When to move, when to stay perfectly still. Tonight's stillness was the equation that kept her breathing. Pa, stop. Nathan stood in the doorway, 12 years old, but trying to fill a man's frame. His fists clenched white at his sides, knuckles prominent against skin stretched too tight over young bones. Get back to bed, boy. Marcus swayed toward his eldest son, bourbon fumes preceding him like a warning. This ain't your concern. The space between father and son contracted to something combustible. Elena stepped into it. Take your brothers. Her voice carried no inflection, no emotion that might ignite Marcus's rage into something worse. Close the door behind you. Nathan's jaw worked. His eyes held something harder than fear, something that terrified Elena more than her husband's fists ever could. The boy was calculating, measuring, deciding how much longer he'd obey. Now Nathan. He retreated, but the look he threw over his shoulder promised this wouldn't always be the outcome. Time was teaching Nathan Morrison that his father was both dangerous and defeatable, and Elena didn't know which truth frightened her more. Marcus grabbed her forearm, fingers digging into the bruises already blooming there from 3 nights prior. His breath carried the sweetness of decay. I asked you a question, woman. Where's my supper? There ain't none. Elena kept her gaze level. Not defiant, but not defeated either. You gambled away the grocery money 3 days back. The backhand came fast, practiced efficient. Copper flooded Elena's mouth, but her legs held. Falling made it worse. Falling gave him the satisfaction of seeing her crumple. Standing meant he tired faster, his arm growing heavy with each strike he couldn't land properly. Don't you dare. Marcus raised his hand again, palm open for another attempt. The boys are watching. 3 words. They stopped him cold. Not because Marcus Morrison cared about his son's feelings, but because even a man this far gone retained enough shame to hide his cruelty from direct witnesses. The performance of fatherhood still mattered, even if the substance had rotted away years ago. His hand lowered, face reddening with an emotion that might have been embarrassment if he'd possessed the capacity for it. This ain't over. It never is, Elena thought, but didn't speak. Marcus grabbed his coat, stumbling toward the door with the exaggerated care of the very drunk. I'll be at Judge Blackwell's game. Don't wait up. The door slammed. His footsteps crunched through February frost, fading into the Texas night like a curse lifting. Elena stood motionless for 60 counted seconds, listening to ensure he'd truly gone. Only then did she allow herself to collapse into the chair by the cold hearth, her spine finally releasing the rigid tension that had held her upright. Mama. Liam appeared first, 8 years old with eyes too observant for childhood. Then Nathan carrying 5-year-old Ethan against his hip. Her 3 boys. Her everything. The only good things Marcus Morrison's seed had ever produced. It's all right, Elena forced her mouth into something approximating a smile. Your pa just needed some air. Pa's a liar. Nathan's voice carried the flatness of stated fact. And a drunk, and a coward. Nathan Morrison. Elena's tone sharpened. You do not speak that way about your father. Why not? The boy's face was stone. It's true, ain't it? Elena had no answer for that. At 12, Nathan remembered the man Marcus had been before the bottle became his only mistress. That Marcus had been charming, funny, full of dreams about their Texas homestead and the fortune waiting just over the horizon. That Marcus had died somewhere in the progressive stages of alcoholism, and the creature who wore his face now was a stranger wearing dead man's clothes. I hate him. Nathan's whisper barely carried across the cabin. Sometimes I wish he was just gone. No. Elena rose and crossed to her eldest, taking his face between her palms. Don't say it. Don't even think it. Wishing dark things leaves dark marks on your soul, and I won't let that poison touch you. Then what do we do? Nathan's voice cracked on the question, adolescence breaking through his attempted stoicism. We survive. That's what we do. That's what Morrisons have always done. Ethan whimpered against Nathan's shoulder, his thin frame trembling. At 5, he understood little of the violence that saturated their home, but he felt it the way small animals sense approaching storms. The tension entered his lungs and made breathing difficult, made his chest tighten, until each inhale became conscious effort. Mama, Ethan's voice emerged reedy and strained. My chest hurts. Elena's heart clenched with familiar dread. Come here, baby. She took Ethan from Nathan and settled into the rocking chair, the boy's weight barely registering against her chest. His breathing was too fast, too shallow. The cold and fear had triggered the condition that plagued him since birth, the weakness in his lungs, that Dr. Patterson in town had said might improve with age, but could also take him young. Slow breaths. Elena kept her voice soft, steady, anchoring. In through your nose, out through your mouth. That's it. Good boy. Liam climbed onto the chair's arm, pressing close to his mother and youngest brother. Tell us a story, Mama. The one about the brave knight. Elena began the familiar tale while her mind calculated different mathematics. How much food remained in the larder? How many days until Marcus gambled away the last of their savings? How long before Judge Harrison Blackwell came calling about the debt her husband swore didn't exist, but Elena knew did? The land. It always circled back to the 60 acres north of town that Marcus had purchased with her father's wedding gift 5 years ago. The soil was too hard, the water too scarce, but Marcus refused to sell. It'll be worth something someday, he'd insist during his rare sober moments. You'll see. That land's going to make us rich. Elena never understood his stubbornness about that particular parcel of Texas scrub. Marcus sold everything else when gambling debts mounted. Her mother's silver, her grandmother's ring. Even Nathan's christening cup vanished into Judge Blackwell's pockets through the alchemy of cards and dice. But the land never. That he guarded like a dragon, hoarding gold, and the intensity of his protection made Elena suspect something she couldn't name. Mama. Nathan's voice cut through her thoughts. What's going to happen to us? She looked at her 3 sons, Nathan trying so desperately to be the man Marcus refused to become. Liam, whose imagination could transform any nightmare into adventure. Ethan, who needed her strength more than any of them, whose fragile lungs depended on warmth and calm and safety she couldn't guarantee. We're going to be fine. The words tasted like lies. I promise. It was the last promise she would make that wouldn't be tested by fire and ice and the casual cruelty of an entire town deciding she didn't deserve mercy. 2 weeks later, Sheriff Tom Garrett stood on Elena's porch with his hat in his hands and death in his eyes. Mrs. Morrison. His weathered face carried the expression of a man who'd delivered this news too many times but never grew comfortable with it. There's been an incident at the Lucky Star Saloon. Elena knew before he spoke another word. Something in her chest shifted, not grief and not relief, but something in the vast territory between the two. A recognition that the man she'd married died years ago, and the monster who replaced him had finally met his inevitable end. How? Her voice was flat, caught cheating at Judge Blackwell's private game. One of the other players drew on him. Who? Does it matter, ma'am? Elena supposed it didn't. Marcus had been dying in increments for years, drowning one swallow at a time. The bullet just made it official, gave his death a timestamp and a coroner's report instead of the slow fade he'd been experiencing. The boys. She focused on what mattered. They'll need to be told proper. Yes, ma'am. Garrett shifted his weight boots, scraping against the porch boards. There's something else. There's always something else. Judge Blackwell's claiming your husband owed the bank considerable money. He's asking about the property, about the land. Even in death, Marcus had found a way to complicate her life, to leave chaos in his wake like a signature. My husband didn't owe the bank anything. Elena's jaw tightened. We paid cash for that land 5 years ago. Judge Blackwell has the receipt. The judge says different, ma'am, says there's papers. Then the judge is mistaken. Garrett's expression suggested he didn't believe that, but lacked the courage to say so. I'd be careful throwing around accusations like that, Mrs. Morrison. Harrison Blackwell ain't a man you want as an enemy. Seems like I already got enough enemies, Sheriff. Elena met his gaze without flinching. One more won't make much difference. After Garrett left, Elena sat in the dark cabin for a long time. No tears came. She wasn't certain she had any remaining for Marcus Morrison husband, in name only father by biology alone, man by the most generous definition. But fear she had plenty of. Judge Harrison Blackwell. Everyone in Coulter Springs knew his name the way medieval peasants knew their lords. Banker, cattle baron, owner of half the businesses on Main Street, and holder of mortgages on the other half. What Blackwell wanted, Blackwell acquired, and apparently he wanted her land with an intensity that had gotten her husband killed. The funeral was small. Elena, the three boys, and Reverend Samuel Cross, who rushed through the service like he had somewhere infinitely more important to be. At the graveside, Elena noticed Judge Blackwell watching from his carriage, 50 yards distant. He didn't approach, didn't offer condolences, just observed with eyes cold and calculating as a snake measuring prey. Mama, Liam tugged her sleeve, his whisper urgent. Why is that man staring at us? Never mind him, baby. Is he a bad man? Elena considered the question. The truth was complicated, layered with nuances, an 8-year-old couldn't parse. But some truths were simple enough. I don't know yet, but I think he wants something that belongs to us. Then we won't let him have it. Liam's face set with determination that would have been comical if it wasn't so heartbreaking. 8 years old and ready to fight the most powerful man in the county. That's right, Elena pulled her son close. We won't. The real battle began 3 days later when Deputy Owen Blackwell rode up to the Morrison cabin on a horse too fine for a lawman's salary. He was young, maybe 24, with his father's sharp features, but eyes that couldn't quite meet hers. Mrs. Morrison. He dismounted with the awkwardness of someone uncomfortable with his errand. I'm Deputy Owen Blackwell. My father sent me with some papers. What kind of papers? Legal notices, ma'am. Owen's face reddened. About debts owed to the bank. Elena took the documents with hands that refused to tremble. She wouldn't give Blackwell's errand boy that satisfaction. The papers claimed Marcus owed $500 to First Bank of Coulter Springs, with the Morrison property listed as collateral. This is a lie. Elena's voice emerged cold and controlled. My husband borrowed $50 5 years ago and repaid it within 6 months. Ma'am, I'm just the messenger. Then take a message back to your father. Elena stepped closer, forcing Owen to look at her. Tell him Elena Morrison doesn't scare easy. Tell him that land belongs to my boys, and it'll belong to them long after Harrison Blackwell is dust in the ground. Owen swallowed hard. Ma'am, I don't think you understand who you're dealing with. Oh, I understand perfectly. Elena smiled without warmth. Does he? The deputy left faster than he'd arrived, and Elena watched him go with satisfaction she knew wouldn't last. Blackwell's first move had been gentle, a warning shot across her bow. The next moves would be harder, meaner, designed to break her. Over the following weeks, Elena discovered just how completely Harrison Blackwell controlled Coulter Springs. The general store suddenly couldn't extend her credit. Mr. Patterson, who'd let her run a tab for 3 years, looked everywhere except her face. I'm sorry, Mrs. Morrison. His voice carried genuine regret. The bank's tightened things up. Can't take risks anymore. What risk? Elena kept her tone level. I've never missed a payment. Patterson's hands twisted his apron. It ain't about that. Then what's it about? Silence, the kind that spoke louder than words. Elena bought what her few remaining coins could afford and left without another word. Behind her, she heard Patterson's heavy sigh, the sound of a man who'd traded his conscience for financial security and knew the price was too high. The boarding house came next. Mrs. Cordelia Price stood in her doorway like a fortress wall, arms crossed over her considerable chest. I'm sorry, Mrs. Morrison. She didn't sound sorry at all. All our rooms are occupied. Through the parlor door, Elena counted 3 empty chairs. Dust motes danced in afternoon sunlight, settling on furniture nobody had touched in weeks. I can pay. Elena kept desperation from her voice. Cash money for a week while I figure things out. It's not about money. Mrs. Price's lips pursed so tight they nearly disappeared into her face. Surely you understand that a woman of your circumstances staying here would be improper. The other boarders have concerns. What other boarders? Your house is empty. I don't have to explain myself to you. Mrs. Price's voice sharpened to a blade's edge. Now please leave before I send for the sheriff. Ma'am, Nathan's voice stopped everyone. He stepped forward, 12 years old and steady as bedrock. What exactly are you afraid my mother will do? Breathe too loud, exist in your sight, Nathan. Elena's warning carried weight. No, Mama, her son's face was hard. I want to know, is it catching being a widow? Will your precious boarders die if they eat breakfast with us, Mrs.? Price's face went red, then purple. You see? You see what kind of children she's raised. What kind of children? Elena interrupted, stepping in front of Nathan with her spine straight and head high. Children who defend their mother, children who recognize cruelty dressed up as respectability. Yes, I see exactly what kind of children I've raised, and I'm proud of every one of them. She took Ethan's hand, nodded at Liam and Nathan. Let's go, boys. Outside on the boardwalk, Liam looked up at her with confusion clouding his young face. Mama, where are we going to sleep tonight? Elena had no answer. They'd tried every respectable establishment in Coulter Springs. The saloon had rooms, but she couldn't take her boys there, couldn't expose them to that particular kind of education. The livery stable might let them sleep in the hayloft, but Ethan's breathing troubles wouldn't survive a night in dust and cold. We'll figure something out. The words rang hollow even to her own ears. That was when the sky decided to add its weight to Elena Morrison's burdens. The blizzard descended with the sudden violence of divine judgment. The sky had threatened all morning clouds were massing like armies on a distant ridge, but the storm hit with fury that stole breath and visibility in equal measure. Within an hour, Coulter Springs disappeared into white chaos. Temperature plummeted, wind cut through clothing like knives through paper. Elena found herself on the town's eastern edge with 3 children and nowhere to go. The wagon she'd driven in that morning offered the only shelter, but the canvas covering provided about as much protection as a spider's web against a hurricane. Get in the wagon. Elena pulled the boys toward the vehicle, her voice barely carrying over the wind's howl. We'll shelter here until it passes. But inside the wagon was scarcely better than outside. Wind tore through gaps in the canvas like hungry wolves. Cold bit deeper with each passing minute. And Ethan with his fragile lungs and his trusting eyes, began to wheeze. It started small, a tightness in his breathing, a slight hitch in his inhale. Elena recognized the signs, immediately had lived with them since Ethan's first winter. But the cold accelerated everything, drove the condition from warning to crisis in minutes instead of hours. Nathan, give me your coat. But Mama, now. She wrapped Ethan in both their coats, but his breathing grew worse. Each inhale became a battle. His small body shuddered with effort, chest heaving like a bellows that couldn't catch proper air. The blue tinge started at his lips, spreading outward like spilled ink. Mama, Ethan's voice was barely a whisper. I can't breathe. Panic clawed at Elena's chest with razor talons. She'd seen this before, these episodes that left Ethan gasping and terrified. Usually warmth and calm could ease him through, could coax his airways to relax and let oxygen flow. But warmth was impossible out here in the frozen heart of the blizzard, and calm was beyond reach when every second tightened the noose around her youngest son's throat. Help, Elena screamed into the storm, her voice swallowed by wind and snow. Please, someone help us. Nothing. Just the howling emptiness of a world that had turned its back. She made a decision. Stay with your brothers. Elena laid Ethan in Liam's lap, the 8-year-old's eyes wide with terror he was trying hard to hide. I'm going to find help. Mama, no. Nathan grabbed her arm. You can't. If I'm not back in 10 minutes, you take them to the saloon. Elena pulled free, her face inches from her eldest son's. You beg if you have to. You promise them anything. Just get Ethan inside where it's warm. Understand? Nathan's face was white, but he nodded. Elena plunged into the blizzard before she could reconsider. The town was less than a quarter-mile away. She'd walked this road hundreds of times, knew every rut and curve. But the storm erased all landmarks, transformed familiar territory into alien landscape. She stumbled forward, screaming for help at every building she passed. No one answered. Through windows she glimpsed firelight, warm rooms, families gathered around hearths with coffee and safety, and the simple blessing of not caring about a widow and her dying son. Please, Elena pounded on the church door with both fists, her hands already numb from cold. Reverend Cross, my son is dying. Nothing. In the name of God, please." She kept pounding until her fist bled. The door cracked open 6 inches. Reverend Samuel Cross's gaunt face appeared in the gap, his expression carrying equal parts shame and fear. "Mrs. Morrison," the Reverend's voice was barely audible over the wind. "I can't. My boy can't breathe." Elena grabbed the edge of the door, tried to force it wider. "He needs warmth. Just for an hour. Judge Blackwell has made it clear." Cross began. "Damn Judge Blackwell." Elena's fury burned hotter than the cold. "A child is dying, Reverend. A 5-year-old child. Does your Bible say nothing about that?" Cross's face contorted with shame, so profound it was almost physical. But fear won the battle happening behind his eyes. Fear always won when Harrison Blackwell was the opponent. "I'm sorry." Cross's voice broke. "I can't help you. I'm so sorry." The door closed. The lock clicked. Elena stood frozen for a long moment, her breath coming in ragged gasps that had nothing to do with the cold. Then something inside her broke clean through, not her spirit that remained intact, honed sharp by years of survival, but her faith in the basic decency of human beings shattered completely irreparably. She turned back toward the wagon, toward her sons, and began the hardest walk of her life. She found them exactly where she'd left them. Nathan holding both younger boys, his face grim with resignation beyond his years. Liam crying silently, tears freezing on his cheeks. And Ethan. Ethan wasn't moving. No, Elena fell to her knees beside the wagon, her voice a sound she'd never made before. "No, no, no." She pulled Ethan into her arms. His face was pale as fresh snow, his lips the blue of winter sky, his chest utterly, completely still. "Breathe, baby." Elena shook him gently, then harder. "Please breathe." Nothing, no response, no flutter of eyelids, no catch of breath. "Ethan." She pressed her face against his. "Ethan, wake up." Liam was sobbing now, the sound breaking through his 8-year-old's attempt at bravery. Nathan's face had gone white as his brother's, shock blanking out all other emotion. "Please." Elena's voice cracked down the middle. "Please, God, don't take him. Take me instead. Take anything else. Just don't take my boy." She pressed her mouth to Ethan's cold lips and breathed for him. Remembered something Dr. Patterson had mentioned once about forcing air into drowned lungs. Once, twice, 3 times, she breathed for her son, willing her life into his small, still body. "Come back." She held him against her chest, rocking. "Come back to Mama." The storm howled around them, the cold bit deeper, and Elena Morrison, kneeling in the snow with her dead child in her arms, began to scream. From the ridge above Coulter Springs, a lone figure watched through a spyglass. Dr. David Mercer had built his cabin 3 miles from town 3 years ago, had chosen the elevation specifically so he could see the town without being part of it. From here, he could observe life happening without the obligation to participate, could watch humanity's small dramas and tragedies without having to feel them. He told himself that was preference, not cowardice, that isolation was choice, not punishment, that refusing to practice medicine after his failures wasn't surrender but wisdom. Tonight he'd raise the spyglass one final time before the storm obscured everything, a habit more than curiosity driving the action. What he saw froze him motionless. A woman, 3 children, a wagon offering no shelter, and the smallest child being held limp and blue in the woman's arms while she screamed into the storm, her mouth open in what looked like prayer or damnation, or both. David's hands began to shake, not from cold, from memory. Michael, 5 years old. Charlotte fever, Catherine holding him at the end, begging David to save him. And David, brilliant, Dr. David Mercer, Johns Hopkins, graduate surgical prodigy, unable to do anything except watch his son die because all his training meant nothing against illness, against fate, against God's casual cruelty. He lowered the spyglass, told himself it wasn't his concern. He wasn't a doctor anymore, wasn't anything anymore. Just a man waiting to die in a cabin full of ghosts and guilt, and the whiskey he used to blur the edges of both. But his feet were already moving toward the stable. His hands were already saddling his horse muscle memory, taking over while his brain screamed protests. And his heart, that organ he'd thought dead and buried alongside Catherine and Michael 3 years ago, was somehow beating again. Wild and painful and absolutely terrifyingly alive. "Don't you dare." David spoke the words aloud to the empty stable. "Don't you dare care about this. but it was too late. The spyglass had shown him something he couldn't unsee. A mother losing her child the way Catherine had lost Michael. A little boy with blue lips, the exact shade of death David knew too intimately. He mounted his horse and rode down the ridge into the storm toward the woman, toward the child, toward everything he'd sworn never to feel again. Elena didn't hear the horse approach through the blizzard's roar. Didn't register anything beyond Ethan's weight in her arms and the certainty that she'd failed him, failed all of them. Then hands were pulling at her. A voice rough and unused to speech was shouting in her ear, competing with the wind. Give him to me. Elena fought instinctively, clutching Ethan tighter. She'd already lost too much. Couldn't lose more. Wouldn't. Woman, listen to me. The voice was closer now, urgent. Give him to me. I'm a doctor. Doctor. The word pierced through her grief like a blade finding flesh. She looked up and saw a man she didn't recognize, tall and dark-haired, with eyes that looked as haunted as she felt. Please, Elena released her son, the hardest thing she'd ever done. Please save him. The stranger laid Ethan on the wagon bed with surprising gentleness, pressed an ear to the small chest, listening with intensity that suggested this wasn't his first time fighting death for a child's life. How long since he breathed? I don't know, Elena's voice broke. A minute, maybe two. The stranger's hands moved with sudden certainty, tilting Ethan's head back at an angle, clearing his airway with fingers that knew exactly what they were doing. Come on, son. The man's voice cracked on the words. Come back. He bent and breathed into Ethan's mouth. Once, twice. His hands pressed rhythmically on the tiny chest compressions, timed with precision that spoke of training, of practice, of having done this before, in circumstances that clearly hadn't ended well. Take my hand. The stranger's voice carried desperation Elena recognized in her own soul. She didn't understand those last words, didn't know if he was speaking to Ethan or to some ghost only he could see. But she saw the anguish in this stranger's face, saw something that mirrored her own terror perfectly. One more breath, one more compression. The stranger's hands trembled now, all his certainty deserting him, and Ethan gasped. His small body convulsed, coughed, drew a rasping, beautiful, miraculous breath. Then another, his chest rising and falling in the rhythm Elena had thought lost forever. That's it. The stranger's voice shook. That's right. Keep breathing, son. Just keep breathing. Elena was crying now, the tears freezing on her face as she pressed herself against Ethan's chest, feeling it rise and fall, the most perfect rhythm in all creation. Thank you. She looked up at the stranger through her tears. Thank you. But he had already turned away, was gathering the reins of his horse with hands that trembled as violently as her own. Wait, Elena struggled to her feet, her legs weak from kneeling in snow. Please, we have nowhere to go. No one will take us in. My son needs warmth, medicine, not my concern. The stranger's voice emerged harsh, deliberately cold. You just saved his life, and he'll lose it again if you stay out here. His tone carried finality. The storm will pass. Find shelter in town. There is no shelter. Elena's voice rose with desperation she couldn't contain. The whole town has turned against us. Even the church. Even the house of God. Then leave Coulter Springs. In this, Elena gestured at the blizzard, at the white chaos that had already tried to kill them once. With a sick child, we'll die before we reach the next settlement. The stranger said nothing, but he didn't mount his horse either. Just stood there in the storm, his back to her shoulders, rigid with internal battle. Please. Elena hated begging, had sworn after Marcus died that she'd never beg another man for anything. But pride meant nothing when balanced against her children's lives. I'm not asking for charity. I'll work. I'll pay. I'll do whatever you need. Just help me get my boys through this night. Silence. The wind howled between them, carrying away her words and possibly her last hope. Then so quietly, Elena barely heard it. Damn you, woman. The stranger turned back. His face was hard, but something behind his eyes had surrendered. One night, that's all. Tomorrow you leave. Yes, Elena would have agreed to anything, anything at all. He helped her load the boys into his wagon with efficiency that suggested medical training, transferred their meager belongings with care that contradicted his cold demeanor, tied her horse to the back. Throughout it all, he didn't meet her eyes. What's your name? Elena asked as they began the slow journey up the ridge toward what she hoped was shelter and not another kind of death. David Mercer. The words came reluctantly, like he regretted them immediately. Dr. David Mercer. I'm Elena Morrison. These are my sons, Nathan, Liam, and Ethan. I don't need to know their names. The coldness of his response should have offended her. Instead, Elena recognized it for what it was. This was a man who'd closed himself off from caring, from connecting, from risk. She understood that perfectly, because until tonight, until Ethan stopped breathing in her arms, she'd been traveling that same road. The cabin appeared through the snow like salvation, small but solid smoke rising from the chimney, a lean-to shelter for horses. And behind it, barely visible in the storm, two crosses marking two graves. Inside, David's voice broke no argument. All of you, Elena carried Ethan while Nathan and Liam followed, their eyes wide at this strange deliverance. The cabin's interior was warm, spare, meticulously organized. Medical techs lined one wall. A locked door stood to one side. Everything spotless and ordered in the way of a man who controlled his environment because he couldn't control his memories. The boy needs steam for his lungs. David was already moving, filling a kettle, adding herbs she didn't recognize. Keep him elevated. Don't let him lie flat. Elena obeyed, settling into a chair with Ethan in her arms. His breathing was still labored, but the blue had faded from his lips. He was alive. Her son was alive. Thank you. The words felt inadequate for the magnitude of what this stranger had done. David didn't respond. He administered medicine to Ethan with hands that were gentle despite his gruff manner, his touch speaking of years of training and practice. You're a doctor, Elena stated the obvious. A real one was. The single word carried weight that could crush mountains. Not anymore. Why? His eyes met hers then, and Elena saw depths of pain that matched her own ocean trenches of grief that would never fully heal. Because the only people who mattered died despite everything I knew. Because medical training means nothing against fever. Against fate, against... He stopped himself, turning away. It doesn't matter. Ancient history. You lost someone. Elena finished for him, understanding with the clarity of shared trauma. Don't. His voice was pure warning. I understand what it's like. To keep breathing when everything inside you died. To wake up every morning and have to remember all over again that they're gone. To you understand nothing. David's voice cut like glass. Nothing at all. Then tell me. Elena's tone gentled. Help me understand. Silence. Then the stove needs wood. I'll get some from the lean-to. The boy should be monitored through the night. He left without another word, escaping into the cold rather than continue a conversation that approached too close to the wounds he'd spent 3 years trying not to touch. Elena sat in the warm cabin with her sons arranged around her and wondered about the broken man who'd saved them, about the graves behind the cabin, about the locked door that clearly held something too painful to face. Outside, the blizzard raged. Inside, a fire burned against the cold. And somewhere in the space between two wounded souls, something fragile and unexpected began to take root. Something that would change both their lives forever. But neither of them knew that yet. For now there was only the storm and survival and the small miracle of a child breathing steadily in his mother's arms. Dawn crept through frost-covered windows like a thief, pale and hesitant. Elena hadn't slept. She'd spent the night watching Ethan breathe, counting each rise and fall of his small chest like prayers answered. Like debts owed to a god she wasn't sure she believed in anymore, but couldn't stop thanking. Mama, Nathan's voice was hoarse from exhaustion. He'd fought sleep until nearly 3 a.m, before his 12-year-old body finally surrendered to the inevitable. I'm here, Will. The old nickname slipped out, the one she'd used when he was small before Marcus's fists taught him to grow up too fast. Is Ethan okay? He's sleeping. Fever broke around 4. Nathan sat up slowly, his eyes moving around the cabin with the suspicious assessment of someone who'd learned to trust nothing at face value. Where's the doctors? Outside, I think. Tending the horses. Do you trust him? The question was more complicated than Nathan knew. Elena considered her answer carefully. He saved your brother's life. That ain't what I asked. 12 years old and already so careful with words, so precise about the distinction between gratitude and trust. Marcus had taught Nathan that lesson well, though not in any way a father should. I trust that he's not working for Judge Blackwell. Elena touched her eldest son's face, feeling the stubble just starting to emerge along his jaw. Beyond that, I don't know enough to say. The cabin door opened, bringing a rush of cold air, and David Mercer with it. He stamped snow from his boots, his face red from wind, his expression unreadable. Storms passed. His voice carried no inflection, just stated fact. Trail should be clear by midday. Thank you for the update. David moved to the stove, checking the kettle with movements that suggested routine ritual, the habits of a man who'd lived alone too long. The boy needs more medicine. His lungs aren't clear yet. You said we could leave today. I said we'd see if the trail was passable. David's back remained turned. I didn't say he was well enough to travel. Elena felt Nathan tense beside her, coiled and ready for confrontation. How long? 2 days, maybe 3. Depends on how he responds to treatment. We can't impose. It's not an imposition. The words came out harsh, almost angry. It's medicine. He leaves too soon. He relapses. He relapses in this cold. He dies. Is that what you want? Of course not. Then stop arguing and let me do my job. Liam stirred by the fire, rubbing his eyes. Mama, I'm hungry. The simple statement broke the tension like a child's hand shattering ice. David's shoulders dropped slightly, some of the rigid anger leaving his posture. There's oatmeal in the cupboard. His voice softened, barely perceptible but present. And preserves. Help yourselves. Let me cook. Elena rose carefully, settling Ethan in the chair she'd vacated. It's the least I can do. You don't have to. I want to. She met his eyes, held them. Please. Something flickered across David's face. Surprise, perhaps, or the memory of someone else standing in his kitchen, offering the same simple gift. A ghost moving behind his eyes like smoke. All right, he turned away quickly, as if prolonged eye contact might reveal too much. I need to check on the horses anyway. After he left, Elena began the familiar rhythm of breakfast preparation. Nathan watched her with troubled eyes, his jaw working like he was chewing words too difficult to swallow. Mama, what are we going to do? We're going to eat breakfast. Then we're going to let Ethan rest and recover. That ain't what I mean, Nathan's voice dropped lower. We can't stay here forever. And when we go back to town, Judge Blackwell will still be waiting. I know. So what's the plan? Elena paused, wooden spoon in her hand, and faced her eldest son with the honesty he deserved. I'm working on it. That ain't good enough, Mama. Her voice sharpened to an edge she rarely turned on her children. I have kept this family alive through your father's drinking, his gambling, his fists. I buried him 2 weeks ago and walked into a town that wanted us dead. I begged for shelter in a blizzard while your brother stopped breathing in my arms. She crossed to Nathan, her face inches from his. And I am still standing, still fighting. So when I say I'm working on it, you will trust that I am working on it. Understood? Nathan's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Yes, ma'am. Good. Now wake your brother. Breakfast will be ready soon. The morning passed in uneasy quiet. David returned and examined Ethan with the thorough precision of someone who'd done this thousands of times. He declared the improvement satisfactory, but cautioned against optimism, his bedside manner apparently consisting of brutal honesty and zero comfort. Liam explored the cabin with 8-year-old curiosity that couldn't be suppressed by circumstances or danger. He touched everything, asked questions about every book and instrument. He found his imagination already spinning the space into adventure. What's this? Liam held up a stethoscope, the tubing tangled around his small fingers. For listening to hearts. David's reply was short-clipped. Can you hear what people are thinking? Despite himself, David's lips twitched, something that wasn't quite a smile but approached the territory. No, just the heartbeat. That's still pretty amazing. Liam pressed the instrument to his own chest, his face lighting with wonder. Mine sounds fast. That's because you've been running around like a wild thing all morning. David took the stethoscope back, but his movements were gentle. Your mama's right. You've got too much energy. Mama says I got the fidgets. Can't sit still long enough to think proper. Elena watched this exchange from the kitchen area, struck by the change in David's demeanor. With Liam, some of his walls lowered. The boy's innocent enthusiasm bypassed whatever defenses the doctor had built, slipped through cracks that adults couldn't penetrate. Liam continued, oblivious to the effect he was having. Did you always want to be a doctor? Oh. David's expression clouded. I wanted to be a soldier. Really, what changed the war changed it. David's voice went distant memory, pulling him somewhere else. Seeing what bullets do to men's bodies made me want to learn how to fix them instead of making more holes. That makes sense. Liam nodded with the gravity of someone 3 times his age. I want to be a Texas Ranger when I grow up. They catch bad guys, do they now? Yes, sir. And Judge Blackwell is definitely a bad guy, so maybe when I'm grown, I'll arrest him. The mention of Blackwell's name darkened David's mood instantly, completely. His face went hard, his shoulders rigid. Some bad guys are harder to catch than others, because they wear nice suits and sit in fancy offices. David's voice carried bitterness that seemed disproportionate to Liam's innocent question. Because they own the law instead of breaking it. Liam's face scrunched in confusion. That doesn't seem fair. It isn't. David rose abruptly, the conversation apparently over. I need to check the trail. Don't let him get cold. After he left, Nathan moved closer to Elena, his voice low enough that Liam wouldn't hear. He knows something about Judge Blackwell. I noticed. Maybe he can help us. He's already helped us more than he wanted to. Elena kept her tone firm. I won't ask for more. But Mama, I said no, Nathan. But even as she spoke, Elena wondered. What was David Mercer's connection to Harrison Blackwell? And why did the judge's name cause such visceral reaction in a man who claimed to have no interest in Coulter Springs' affairs? The afternoon brought answers she hadn't sought. David returned from his ride with a tight jaw and troubled eyes. He went directly to his desk, pulling out papers and spreading them across the surface with movements that suggested decision commitment, the end of some internal debate. Mrs. Morrison. Elena looked up from where she'd been teaching Nathan his letters using one of the medical texts as primer, since they had nothing else. Yes? Your husband worked at the telegraph office sometimes. Did you know that I knew he picked up shifts when we needed money? Elena felt unease crawl up her spine. Why? 3 years ago, David's voice was carefully controlled, each word measured. The winter of the scarlet fever outbreak. Was he working soon? Then Elena thought back. 3 years ago, Ethan had just turned 2. Marcus's drinking had gotten worse, the gambling more frequent, the violence more unpredictable. They'd needed every penny just to keep food on the table. I think so, her mouth went dry. Why are you asking? David was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was flat, emotionless in the way of someone discussing something too painful for inflection. Because 3 years ago, a warning telegram was sent from Fort Worth. About the fever. It should have reached me in time to quarantine my family to keep them safe. Instead, it was delayed by 2 days. The implication hit Elena like a fist to the stomach. You're saying Marcus, I'm saying someone at that telegraph office held that message. David's hands gripped the desk edge, knuckles white. And by the time it reached me, my wife and son were already exposed. Already dying. Elena's legs felt weak. She sank into the nearest chair, her mind racing through implications she didn't want to face. Marcus wouldn't. He was many things, but he wouldn't deliberately. Maybe not deliberately. David's voice was bitter. Maybe someone paid him to delay it without explaining why. Maybe he was too drunk to understand what he was doing. Maybe he didn't ask questions because he needed the money more than he needed to care about consequences. Who would pay him to do that? Their eyes met. The answer hung between them, unspoken but understood. Judge Blackwell. The fever killed 19 people. David continued, his voice hollow. 19 families devastated. Children, parents, grandparents. And in the aftermath, when everyone was too grief-stricken to think clearly, Blackwell bought up property all along the proposed railway route for pennies on the dollar. He paused, letting the weight of that sink in. Including yours. Elena felt sick. You think Blackwell deliberately let the fever spread so he could buy land cheap? I think Blackwell saw an opportunity and exploited it. David's jaw tightened. Whether he caused the delay or just benefited from it, I can't prove. But your husband might have been part of it. Knowingly or not. The words hurt more than they should have. Marcus was dead and Elena had stopped defending him long before the bullet ended his life. But the idea that his weakness, his addiction to money and drink, might have contributed to the death of this man's family. I'm sorry. The words seemed inadequate. I'm so sorry. It's not your fault. He was my husband. He was his own man who made his own choices. David's voice softened slightly, some of the anger draining away. I've spent 3 years blaming myself for not being here when my family needed me. Blamed God, blamed fate, blamed every person I could think of. Blaming a dead man doesn't bring anyone back. Then why tell me this? Elena looked at him directly. Why now? Because if Blackwell arranged your husband's death the same way he might have arranged that telegram delay, you need to understand what you're dealing with. David's eyes were hard. This isn't just a greedy banker. This is a man who treats human lives as obstacles to be removed. Elena absorbed this information, feeling the situation shift from dangerous to deadly. What do I do? You could run. David's voice was flat. Take your sons. Leave Texas. Start over somewhere Blackwell can't reach you. And let him win. Elena stood her spine straight. Let him take everything Marcus left us. Your husband left you debt and danger. That land isn't worth your life. That land is my son's future. Elena's voice was steel. It's the only thing of value I can give them. The only inheritance that isn't shame and bad memories. Inheritance means nothing if you're dead. Then I won't die. David stared at her for a long moment, something like respect flickering behind his grief. You're serious. I've never been more serious about anything. Blackwell has the law on his side. He has money power connections. And I have something he doesn't. Elena's voice was still as deep water. I have nothing left to lose. The silence stretched between them. Then unexpectedly, David laughed. It was a rusty sound, as if he'd forgotten as if the muscles required for joy had atrophied from disuse. You remind me of Catherine. He said it quietly like confession. My wife. She had that same fire, that same stubborn refusal to accept impossible odds. What happened to her? She got sick. David's voice caught. She died. And I couldn't save her. I'm sorry. Don't be. He turned away, but not before Elena saw the moisture in his eyes. The point is, she never gave up. Even at the end, even when fever was burning her alive, she was telling me to keep fighting. To not let grief destroy what we'd built. Did you listen, number 'em? David's shoulders slumped. I ran, hid on this mountainside, and pretended the world didn't exist. He faced her again, his expression raw and open in a way it hadn't been before. Don't make my mistake, Mrs. Morrison. Whatever you decide to do about Blackwell, don't run from it. Face it head on. Is that advice or a warning? Both. The conversation was interrupted by Ethan's cough. Elena hurried to her youngest, checking his forehead, adjusting his blankets with the automatic movements of motherhood. Mama, Ethan's voice was small and tired. Where are we? Somewhere safe, baby. Who's that man, Dr. Mercer? He helped you feel better. Ethan studied David with solemn eyes that seemed too old for his 5-year-old face. Thank you for helping me breathe. Something cracked in David's expression. The simple gratitude of a child so freely given seemed to pierce through defenses that Elena's words couldn't penetrate. You're welcome, son. David's voice was rough. Just keep resting. You'll be running around again soon. Promise, David hesitated. Promises were dangerous things. He'd made promises before that circumstances hadn't let him keep. I promise to do everything I can. He said it finally, carefully. Ethan seemed satisfied with this answer. His eyes closed, and within moments he was asleep again. He trusts you, Elena observed, keeping her voice low. Children trust easily. Children sense things adults miss. Elena's voice was certain. Ethan's always been careful with strangers. If he trusts you, there's a reason. David didn't respond, but Elena saw his hand tremble slightly as he turned away, saw the way he paused at the window and looked out at the 2 graves behind the cabin. The second day passed with subtle shifts in the cabin's atmosphere. David spoke more, asked questions about the boys' education, their interests, their dreams. He taught Nathan how to check a pulse properly, showed him the correct placement of fingers on the wrist, the count that indicated health or concern. He let Liam help organize his medical supplies, alphabetizing bottles and jars, while Liam created elaborate stories about what each medicine could do. The boy's imagination transformed willow bark extract into dragon's blood, transformed iodine into fairy tears. You're good with them, Elena said that evening after the boys had fallen asleep. They're easy to be good with. Not always. Elena's voice was honest. Nathan can be difficult. He carries too much anger. He carries responsibility he shouldn't have to. David's voice was thoughtful. He's been the man of the house for a long time, hasn't he? Even before your husband died. Elena nodded. Marcus checked out years ago. Nathan stepped up. That's a heavy burden for a child. I know. Elena spread her hands helplessly. I've tried to ease it, but some things you can't protect them from. No, David's eyes grew distant. You can't. They sat in comfortable silence, the fire crackling between them, the wind outside reduced to gentle whisper after the blizzard's fury. It was the first peace Elena had felt in longer than she could remember. Mrs. Morrison, Elena. David blinked. I'm sorry, my name is Elena. You can use it if you want. He was quiet for a moment. Only if you call me David, David. She tested the name, found it fit her mouth well. All right, Elena. He nodded once the exchange feeling more significant than it should. Can I ask you something? You can ask. I might not answer. That room. She gestured toward the locked door she'd noticed the first night. What's behind it? David went very still. Michael's room. My son's. Have you been inside since I dusted sometimes? David's voice was flat, controlled. Make sure nothing's disturbed. But I don't stay. I can't. Why not? Because if I go in there, if I touch his things, smell his clothes, he broke off, struggling. He'll be truly gone. As long as that room stays exactly as it was, some part of him is still here. Elena understood more than he probably realized. It's been 3 years, David. I know exactly how long it's been. His voice sharpened. Down to the day, the hour, the minute. I'm not criticizing. Elena searched for the right words. I'm just saying grief isn't meant to be locked away. It needs air, space, time to transform into something you can carry instead of something that crushes you. And what do you know about it? I know that I hated my husband by the end. Elena's voice was steady. But I still reach for him at night, still expect to hear his footsteps, still flinch at loud noises, waiting for his anger. She paused, making sure David was listening. Grief isn't always about love, David. Sometimes it's about habit, about the space someone occupied in your life, even if that space was painful. The absence still echoes. David said nothing, but he didn't leave, which Elena took as progress. Michael was 5. He said finally, the words emerging, slowly. Same age as Ethan. He had Catherine's eyes and my stubborn streak. His voice softened with memory. He wanted to be a cowboy when he grew up. Had this wooden horse he'd ride around the cabin for hours, making galloping sounds, shooting imaginary outlaws. He sounds wonderful. He was. David's voice broke slightly. He was everything. Tell me about him. Elena leaned forward. Not how he died, how he lived. The request seemed to startle him. People probably always asked about the death, the illness, the tragedy. No one asked about the life before. He loved horses. David's voice was rough but warming. Catherine used to say he was half centaur. He'd ride anything horses. Mules, even tried to ride a goat once. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. He was fearless. Too fearless, really. Catherine and I worried he'd break his neck before he turned 10. He sounds like Liam. Elena smiled. My middle one. Too brave for his own good. Liam reminds me of him, David admitted. The way he talks, asks questions, throws himself into everything. It's difficult and comforting both at once. That's how healing works, I think. Elena's voice was gentle. The reminders hurt, but they also keep the person alive in some way. You're very wise for someone so young. Elena laughed, the first genuine laugh she'd had in weeks. I'm not young, David. I'm 32 and feel like 60. 32 is young. I'm 38 and feel like 100. We're quite a pair, aren't we? Elena's smile was sad. 2 ancient souls pretending to function. Something like that. The warmth between them was unexpected, unfamiliar. Elena found herself leaning toward it like a plant towards sunlight, even as warning bells sounded in her mind. This man is damaged. You are damaged. Neither of you is ready for whatever this might become. But the loneliness of the past years pressed against her in the simple comfort of adult conversation. Real conversation, not transactions or demands, felt like water in a desert. Elena, David's voice was different now, careful. You asked what you should do about Blackwell. Yes, I've been thinking. He rose and crossed to his desk, pulling out a leather portfolio. I have documentation, notes I've kept over the past 3 years, patterns I've observed. What kind of documentation? Maps showing property acquisitions along the railway route? David spread papers across the table. Dates that correspond to deaths and disasters. Testimony from people who felt pressured but were too scared to speak up. Elena's heart beat faster. Why did you collect all this? I'm not sure, David's voice was honest. Maybe I was hoping someone would eventually need it. Maybe I was just trying to make sense of what happened to my family. He met her eyes. Maybe I was waiting for a reason to stop hiding. And now there's a woman with 3 children who's being robbed by the same man who might have killed my wife and son. His jaw tightened. I'm not a fighter, Elena. I'm a doctor who stopped doctoring, a coward who ran from his grief. He paused. But I can't watch Blackwell destroy another family and do nothing. What are you saying? I'm saying I'll help you. David's voice was firm. If you want it, if you're willing to fight. Elena stared at him. This broken man, this hermit who'd spent 3 years avoiding all human connection, was offering to stand beside her against the most powerful man in the county. Why? She whispered. Because Catherine would have wanted me to. David's voice was thick with emotion. Because Michael would have grown up to be the kind of man who helped people. He stopped, swallowed hard. Because you and your boys are the first people who've made me feel alive since I buried my family. And I'm tired of being dead. Tears stung Elena's eyes. She blinked them back fiercely. What about if we win, if we beat Blackwell, what then? I don't know. His voice was honest, raw. I can't promise anything beyond this fight. I'm not whole, Elena. I might never be whole again. Neither am I. They looked at each other across the firelit cabin. 2 damaged souls recognizing their reflections, seeing in each other the possibility of something neither dared name. Partners, then. Elena extended her hand. Against Blackwell, against whatever comes next. David took her hand. His grip was warm, strong, steady. Partners. The word hung in the air between them, weighted with possibilities, neither fully understood, but both felt pulling them towards something dangerous and necessary, and maybe, just maybe, redemptive. Outside, the stars were emerging from behind dispersing clouds. Inside, something was emerging, too fragile, uncertain, but undeniably alive. The battle was just beginning. On the third morning, hoofbeats approached the cabin. Elena tensed her hand, moving instinctively toward the revolver she kept hidden in her coat pocket. It's all right. David rose from his desk, recognizing something in the sound. I know that horse. He opened the door to reveal a tall black man, broad-shouldered and weathered, with a scar running from his left temple to his jaw. His eyes were sharp, assessing kind. Isaiah. David's voice held genuine warmth. What brings you up the mountain, you stubborn fool? The man dismounted and pulled David into a rough embrace. Grace sent me. Said if I didn't check on you after that blizzard, she'd tan my hide worse than any Confederate ever did. Grace worries too much. Grace knows you too well. Isaiah's eyes moved past David to Elena, standing cautiously in the doorway. And who might this be, Elena Morrison? David stepped back, allowing Isaiah to enter. Her sons are inside. Mrs. Morrison, this is Isaiah Grant. We served together during the Indian Wars. He's the blacksmith in Coulter Springs. Ma'am, Isaiah removed his hat respectfully. I've heard about your troubles. From whom? From everyone. Isaiah's expression was sympathetic. You're the talk of the town. Judge Blackwell's been making sure of that. Says you're everything from a thief to a fallen woman. Elena's jaw tightened. None of which is true. I know it ain't. Isaiah's voice was firm. I knew Marcus Morrison. He was a weak man, but you ain't weak. Anyone with eyes can see that. Thank you. Isaiah turned to David, his expression shifting to something between amusement and exasperation. So this is what finally brings you down from the mountain. A widow and 3 kids. Don't start, Isaiah. I ain't starting nothing. Isaiah grinned, just observing. 3 years you've been up here feeling sorry for yourself, and all it took was a pretty woman in trouble to wake you up, Isaiah. He's helping me fight Judge Blackwell. Elena interjected, her voice carrying steel. We could use more allies. Isaiah studied her with new interest. Fight Blackwell. With what army? With evidence, documentation, and anyone in that town who's been hurt by him and is willing to speak up. That's a tall order, ma'am. People are scared of Blackwell. People were scared of Marcus when he was drinking. Elena's voice was fierce. Didn't make him any less of a coward underneath. Fear is just a weapon. Take it away and men like Blackwell have nothing. Isaiah let out a low whistle. She's got fire, David. I'll give her that. She's got more than fire. David's voice was quiet. She's got conviction. The 2 men exchanged a look Elena couldn't quite read. Some history passed between them. some understanding that needed no words. Then Isaiah nodded slowly. All right, I'm in. Grace will have my hide if I don't help a mother protect her children. What's the plan? We're still working on that, David admitted. Blackwell's claiming Marcus owed the bank $500. We need to prove the debt is fabricated. The original loan documents might help. Isaiah crossed his arms. If they exist, they exist. David's voice was certain. They're in Blackwell's office. Question is, how to get them. Deputy James Porter has been asking questions. Elena spoke up. He's not comfortable with what's happening. I could see it in his eyes when he gave us time to search my house. Porter's a good kid. Isaiah's voice carried respect. But Blackwell's got leverage on him, his sister's medical bills. I know. Elena's mind was already working. But sometimes people surprise you. Sometimes people decide they've had enough of being controlled. The conversation continued through the morning, plans taking shape around the kitchen table. Nathan listened intently, adding observations that impressed the adults with their sharpness. Liam kept Ethan entertained by the fire building, elaborate stories from nothing but imagination, and the boys' need for distraction. By noon, they had the beginnings of a strategy. Isaiah would return to Coulter Springs and quietly gauge who might be willing to testify against Blackwell. David would organize his evidence, build a case that even a corrupt sheriff couldn't ignore. Elena would prepare for the confrontation that now seemed inevitable. There's something else, Isaiah said as he prepared to leave. Blackwell's called a town meeting, day after tomorrow. He's planning to publicly address your situation, Mrs. Morrison. Address it how word is he's going to demand the property be seized immediately. Isaiah's expression darkened. He's claiming your husband's debts put the whole town at risk. That letting you keep the land would set a dangerous precedent. That's ridiculous. That's Blackwell. Isaiah shook his head. He wraps his greed in civic concern, makes himself look like the hero protecting everyone from bad influences. Elena's hands clenched. He's going to try to destroy my reputation in front of the entire town. Most likely, Isaiah's voice was gentle. He'll bring up Marcus's drinking, the gambling. Maybe hint at things between you and David that ain't true. Let him try. Elena's voice was cold. I've survived worse than public humiliation. Isaiah mounted his horse but hesitated before leaving. Ma'am, one more thing. Grace asked me to tell you if you need a place in town, our home is open. We ain't much, but we ain't afraid of Blackwell neither. Tears pricked Elena's eyes at this unexpected kindness from people she barely knew. Thank you. That means more than you know. Just doing what's right. Isaiah tipped his hat. David, I'll send word when I learn more. Thank you, old friend. After Isaiah departed, the cabin felt smaller, more intimate. Elena busied herself with the boys' lunch, but her mind raced with possibilities and fears. Mama. Nathan appeared at her elbow, his young face serious. I want to help. You are helping, Nathan. You've been wonderful with your brothers. I mean, really help. Nathan's voice dropped lower. Against Blackwell, I can read, I can write, I can watch and listen. People ignore kids, but that means we hear things they don't expect us to hear. Elena studied her eldest son. He was growing up too fast, losing childhood to necessity and circumstance. But she couldn't protect him from reality forever. What did you have in mind? Pa kept things hidden. Nathan's eyes were bright with purpose. Important things. I found his box once under the floorboards in the back bedroom. There were papers inside. I didn't understand them then, but maybe you would now. Hope fluttered in Elena's chest. Do you remember where exactly third board from the wall? Near the window. It's loose. You can pry it up with a knife. Elena looked toward David, who had been listening from his desk. If Marcus documented anything about his dealings with Blackwell, David's voice was thoughtful. It could be the proof we need. But getting to our house means going back to town. Then I'll go back to town. Elena's voice was firm. Ethan's better. He can travel if we go slowly. And I can't hide up here forever. She met David's eyes directly. You said not to run, to face things head on. This is me facing them. The silence stretched between them. Then David nodded slowly. I'll come with you. You don't have to. I'm not letting you face Blackwell alone, but his voice broke no argument. Partners, remember, that means I don't send you into battle while I hide on my mountain. People will talk. People already talk. David's expression was hard. Let them. Elena felt something shift in her chest. This man, who had spent 3 years avoiding all human contact, was willing to walk into the town that held his worst memories for her sake. "Thank you, David. Don't thank me yet. We haven't won anything." "No." Elena smiled, the first real smile that had reached her eyes in longer than she could remember. "But we're not beaten either." That night, after the boys had fallen asleep, Elena found David standing by the window staring at the graves visible in moonlight. "Tell me about her," Elena said softly. "Catherine, what was she like?" David was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then slowly the words began to emerge. "She was stubborn. God, she was stubborn. Argued with me about everything: medicine, politics, the proper way to cook eggs. We fought constantly, but it was never cruel. It was alive. She made me feel alive." "She sounds wonderful." "She was." His voice caught. "When she died, I thought I'd die too. Wanted to. But she made me promise I wouldn't give up. Made me swear on Michael's head that I'd keep living." "You kept your promise." "Did I?" David laughed bitterly. "Hiding up here talking to ghosts, refusing to practice medicine? That's not living. That's just breathing. It's more than breathing now." Elena moved closer. "You're fighting again. Helping people again." "That's what Catherine wanted, isn't it?" "I don't know." David's voice was small. "I don't know what she'd think of me now. I think she'd be proud." Elena's words were certain. "I think she'd say, 'It took you long enough, you stubborn man, but you finally found your way back.'" David turned to look at her, his face half-shadowed in moonlight. "Elena, I need to tell you something." "What?" "That first night," David's voice was barely a whisper. "When I saw you in the storm, I almost didn't come down. Almost let you die because I was too scared to feel anything again. But you didn't let us die." "No." His hands clenched at his sides. "And do you know why?" Elena shook her head. "Because Ethan was blue." David's voice broke. "And Michael was blue when I found him. Because I saw my son in your son's face and I couldn't let it happen again." Elena reached out slowly, carefully, and touched his face. The gesture surprised them both. "You saved my child's life." Her voice was fierce. "Whatever brought you down that mountain, whatever made you decide to help, I don't care. You saved him. You gave me back my son." Elena, David's voice was rough with emotion. "I know we're both broken." Elena continued. "I know neither of us is ready for anything beyond this fight. But I want you to know you're not alone anymore. Whatever happens with Blackwell, whatever comes next, you don't have to be alone." David's hand came up to cover hers where it rested against his face. His palm was warm, calloused from work, trembling slightly. "Neither do you," he said simply. They stood like that for a long moment, two wounded souls finding unexpected harbor in each other's presence. The fire crackled, the wind whispered, and something that felt dangerously like hope began to bloom in the space between them. Then Elena stepped back, breaking the spell before it could deepen into something neither was prepared to handle. "We should rest." Her voice was steadier than she felt. "Tomorrow we ride to town." "Yes." David's voice was equally controlled, but his eyes held warmth they hadn't before. "Good night, Elena." "Good night, David." She retreated to the bed where her son slept, but sleep was slow to come. Her heart was too full, her mind too busy, her hope too dangerous to ignore. Tomorrow would bring war. But tonight, in a cabin on a mountain surrounded by snow and stars and the graves of people she'd never known, Elena Morrison felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt ready. The wagon wheels crunched through half-melted snow as they descended toward Coulter Springs. Elena held Ethan close, his breathing steady now, but still fragile, still requiring the vigilance of a mother who'd watched him die once and refused to let it happen again. Nathan sat rigid beside David, watching the approaching town like a soldier watching enemy territory. "Mama." Liam tugged at her sleeve, his voice carrying the uncertainty of a child who'd learned the world wasn't safe. "People are staring." They were. From porches, from windows, from the boardwalk, outside the general store, faces turned toward them with expressions ranging from curiosity to condemnation. Word had spread that the Morrison widow was returning and she wasn't alone. "Let them stare." Elena kept her voice quiet but firm. "We've done nothing wrong." David guided the wagon toward Isaiah Grant's blacksmith shop, keeping his eyes forward despite the whispers that followed them like shadows, like accusations. Given voice. "Dr. Mercer." A woman's voice cut through the murmurs, sharp as a blade. Is that really you? David didn't respond. His jaw was set, his knuckles white on the reins. 3 years. The woman continued, her voice rising. 3 years you've been hiding up there while we had no doctor. My husband died because there was no one to treat his pneumonia, and now you come back for her, Martha. Isaiah appeared from his shop, wiping his hands on his apron, his presence commanding despite, or perhaps because of his calm. That's enough. It ain't enough. Martha's face was red, tears streaming down her cheeks. His wife and son die, and suddenly he's too good to help the rest of us. But a gambling widow bats her eyes. I said enough. Isaiah's voice dropped to a register that brooked no argument. Dr. Mercer don't owe you explanations. None of us know what we'd do in his place. Martha's face reddened further, but she retreated. The crowd didn't disperse, though. If anything, more people gathered, drawn by conflict, the way flies gathered to rotting meat. Inside, Isaiah jerked his head toward the shop. Grace has got coffee on. Grace Grant was a small woman with sharp eyes and a tongue that could cut or comfort with equal precision. She took one look at Ethan's pale face and immediately began heating water. That child needs rest. She declared, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd raised 6 children and buried 2. And you look like you haven't slept in a week. I'm fine. You're lying, but I'll let it pass. Grace's expression softened. Isaiah told me what happened. The blizzard, the church turning you away. Shameful, absolutely shameful. Thank you for opening your home to us. It's what decent folks do. Grace shot a pointed look toward the window where curious townspeople still lingered. Some of us remember that. Nathan stepped forward, his young face serious beyond his years. Mrs. Grant, ma'am, we need to get to our house. There might be something there that can help us against Judge Blackwell. Grace's eyebrows rose. You've got a plan. We're working on one. David said, his voice carefully neutral. But first we need to search the Morrison place. Blackwell's had men watching it. Isaiah crossed his arms, his expression troubled. 2 deputies rotating shifts. Says it's to protect town property until the debt matter's resolved. The property isn't the town's to protect. Elena's voice carried heat she couldn't quite contain. I know that. Isaiah's tone was patient. Blackwell knows that, but he's got everyone convinced otherwise. He paused, thinking. There might be a way, though. The deputies change shifts at sundown. There's usually a gap of about 20 minutes while Owen Blackwell, that's the judge's boy, stops at the saloon. Owen is one of the deputies. David's voice tightened. Yeah. Isaiah's expression darkened. Incompetent as a 3-legged mule, but loyal to his daddy. The other one's James Porter. He's not a bad sort, just scared. Everyone's scared of Blackwell. Elena's voice was flat. That's the problem. That's about to change. David's voice carried an edge Elena hadn't heard before. How far is the Morrison place from here? 1.5 miles, give or take. Then Elena and I go tonight. David's tone broke no argument. During the shift change. I'm coming too, Nathan said immediately. No, Elena's voice was firm. You stay here with your brothers. But Mama, Nathan, she knelt to meet his eyes, taking his face in her hands. I need you to protect Liam and Ethan. If something goes wrong, if we don't come back, you take them and you keep them safe. Can you do that? Nathan's jaw worked. He wanted to argue. She could see it in every line of his young body, in the tension of his shoulders, in the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. But finally he nodded. Yes, ma'am. That's my boy. The hours until sundown passed with agonizing slowness. Elena helped Grace prepare supper, grateful for the distraction of chopping vegetables and stirring pots. David reviewed his documentation with Isaiah, identifying the most damning pieces of evidence against Blackwell. This one. Isaiah pointed at a deed, his scarred finger tracing the date. The Wilson property. They sold 3 days after Mary Wilson died in the fever. Blackwell paid half what it was worth. Tom Wilson might testify to that. David's voice was thoughtful. If we can convince him. Tom's scared. Isaiah shook his head. Blackwell holds his mortgage now. Then we find someone who isn't scared. David's voice carried frustration. There has to be someone. There's Eliza Simmons. Isaiah's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Her husband ran the telegraph office. He's been dead 2 years now, but she knows things. She told Grace once that something wasn't right about messages being delayed. David's expression darkened, grief and rage warring on his face. The telegram that was supposed to warn me about the fever. Maybe. Isaiah's voice was careful. She never said specifics, but she knows something. Problem is she's terrified of Blackwell. Won't talk to anyone about it. She'll talk to me. Elena's voice was quiet but certain. Woman to woman, widow to widow. I'll make her understand what's at stake. And if she won't, then I'll find another way. Sundown came too quickly and not quickly enough. Elena kissed each of her sons, lingering longest on Ethan, memorizing the warmth of his small body, the rhythm of his breathing, the weight of him in her arms. Be good for Mrs. Grace. Mama, are you coming back? Ethan's voice was small, frightened in a way that broke Elena's heart. Yes, baby, I promise. You always keep your promises. Always. The word tasted like a vow, like a prayer, like something she'd fight heaven and hell to make true. Outside, the temperature had dropped sharply. David helped Elena onto his horse, mounting behind her. The intimacy of the position was unavoidable, his arm bracketing her as he held the reins, his chest warm against her back, his breath stirring the hair at her temple. Ready. His voice was low, meant only for her. No. Elena's honesty surprised them both. Let's go anyway. They rode in silence, staying off the main road to avoid detection. The Morrison place appeared through the gathering darkness, small and shabby and achingly familiar. Elena felt her throat tighten at the sight of it, at the memories it held, both precious and poisonous. There, David pointed toward a figure moving away from the house toward town. That's Owen, right on schedule. They waited until he was out of sight, then approached from the back. Elena's hands trembled as she pushed open the door she'd walked through 1,000 times, the door that had been gateway to both love and violence, both hope and despair. The smell hit her first. Stale whiskey, old tobacco, the ghost of Marcus's presence lingering like a curse that wouldn't lift. The cabin was exactly as she'd left it, dishes in the sink, Marcus's coat still hanging by the door. Everything frozen in the moment of his death, like insects trapped in amber. Where's the hiding spot? David's whisper was urgent. Back bedroom, third board from the wall. They moved quickly, quietly. Elena knelt beside the window, her fingers finding the loose board Nathan had described. It lifted easily, revealing a small wooden box and something else. A bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon, her father's handwriting on the top envelope. Got it. Elena reached for the box. We need to go. Now, but Elena hesitated, her eyes caught by those letters. I thought Marcus destroyed these. My father wrote me every month after the wedding. Marcus said they'd stopped coming, that Papa had disowned me for marrying beneath my station. She grabbed the letters along with the box, her heart aching for all the words she'd missed, all the love Marcus had stolen from her own. Footsteps outside, coming closer, heavier than expected. Hide. David breathed, pulling her behind the door. The front door creaked open, heavy boots on the wooden floor, but it wasn't Owen Blackwell's unsteady gait or even James Porter's careful tread. I know you're in here. Deputy Porter's voice was weary rather than threatening. Saw the horse tracks. You ain't as clever as you think. Silence. Elena's heart pounded so loud she was certain he could hear it, certain the sound would give them away. Look, Mrs. Morrison, Porter continued, his voice carrying into the back room. I don't want trouble. I got a wife, 2 kids. Can't afford to cross Blackwell. He sighed, the sound carrying defeat and something else, defiance, struggling against fear. But I ain't going to hurt a woman and her children neither. Take whatever you came for and go. I'll give you 10 minutes before I raise the alarm. That's the best I can do. Elena exchanged a look with David. He nodded slowly. She stepped out from behind the door. Porter jumped, his hand going to his gun before he recognized her. Lord, woman, you scared the life out of me. Why are you helping us? I ain't helping you. Porter's face was troubled. I'm just looking the other way. While Porter was silent for a long moment. My little girl was sick last year. Real sick. There wasn't no doctor in town, hadn't been for 3 years. She almost died. Would have if Grace Grant hadn't known some remedies. I'm sorry. Point is, Porter's voice roughened. Dr. Mercer there saved lives before he left. Good lives. He didn't deserve what happened to him. He stepped aside, opening the path to the door. And neither do you, ma'am. 10 minutes. Don't waste them. They didn't. Within moments, they were on the horse and riding hard toward the blacksmith shop, Elena clutching the box and letters to her chest, praying they contained something, anything that could help. Back at the Grants' home, she spread the box's contents on the table. David, Isaiah, and Grace gathered close, their faces grim in the lamplight. Account ledger. David flipped through the pages, his finger tracing entries. Gambling debts mostly. But look here, this entry from 6 months ago. Paid HB in full $50. That's the original loan. Isaiah's voice carried satisfaction. 50, not 500. That's proof Blackwell inflated the debt. It's a start. David continued sorting. What else is there? Elena rifled through the papers, her hands moving faster as hope built in her chest. Land deed, marriage certificate, bills of sale. And then her breath caught, her whole body going still. Oh my God, what is it? She held up a single sheet of paper, her hand shaking so badly the words blurred. It's a telegram, dated 3 years ago, warning about the scarlet fever outbreak in Fort Worth. David went very still, all the color draining from his face. Let me see that. Elena handed it over, watching as he read it slowly, his expression moving from shock to anguish to something harder, colder. This is the warning. David's voice was barely audible, the one that should have reached me in time. There's a note on the back. Elena's voice was thin, in Marcus's handwriting. David turned the paper over. The words were scrawled hastily, as if written in a moment of conscience or perhaps drunken regret. HB paid me $100 to hold this until after the 15th. God forgive me. I didn't know people would die. I didn't know. The silence that followed was absolute crushing. He knew. David's voice cracked like ice breaking. Your husband knew he was condemning people to death, and he did it anyway. For $100, his hands began to shake, the telegram trembling between his fingers. Catherine, Michael, 19 people. For $100. Elena felt sick, her stomach churning with horror and shame. She'd known Marcus was weak, knew he was capable of terrible things when drink and money were involved. But this, I'm sorry, the words were inadequate. She knew they were inadequate, knew nothing she could say would erase what Marcus had done. I'm so sorry. David stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He moved to the window, his back to the man mall, his shoulders rigid with grief and rage. Please, Elena's voice was desperate. He didn't know people would die. The note says he didn't know, he knew it was wrong. David's voice was cold dead. That's why Blackwell paid him. That's why he hid it instead of destroying it. He turned his eyes hollow. Your husband was a murderer, Elena. Maybe not intentionally, but a murderer nonetheless. He killed my family. Killed 19 people. And for what? Drinking money. And now he's dead. Elena's voice was steady despite the tears streaming down her face. He paid for his sins. Did he? David's laugh was bitter broken. A bullet in a card game. That's payment for killing 19 people, for destroying my life, for taking Catherine and Michael from me. Isaiah cleared his throat, his voice gentle but firm. This telegram is proof that Blackwell arranged the delay. It's evidence of conspiracy, of deliberate murder for financial gain. I don't care about evidence right now. David still wouldn't turn around, wouldn't look at any of them. You should. Isaiah's voice was patient. Because this proves Blackwell is guilty too. More guilty than Marcus ever was. Your husband, he looked at Elena, was a weak man who made a terrible choice. But Blackwell orchestrated it. Blackwell paid for it. Blackwell used that tragedy to steal land to enrich himself on the graves of children. Slowly, very slowly, David turned. His eyes were red, his face ravaged, but beneath the pain, something harder was emerging. You're right, his voice was raw. Wade orchestrated everything. The fever, the land grabs, all of it. And now he's trying to steal from a widow and orphans. So we stop him. Elena said, her voice stronger than she felt. We use this telegram, Marcus's ledger, your documentation. We expose him at the town meeting. It won't be enough. David's voice carried defeat. Blackwell will claim the telegram is forged. He'll say Marcus's note is fiction, the ramblings of a drunk. Then we find more evidence. Elena stepped closer. We find Eliza Simmons. We find anyone else who knows the truth. The meeting is day after tomorrow. David's voice was flat. That's not enough time. Then we work through the night. Elena held his gaze, refusing to let him retreat back into grief and isolation. Refusing to let Marcus's sins destroy what they'd built. You still want to fight? David's voice carried disbelief. Even knowing what your husband did, my husband's sins aren't my son's inheritance. Elena's voice was fierce, unyielding. I won't let them grow up under Blackwell's shadow because their father was too weak to say no to a bribe. I'll fight until my last breath if I have to. She paused, the question sharp as a blade. Will you? The challenge hung between them. David could walk away now, could return to his mountain and his isolation and his grief. No one would blame him. He'd earned the right to his anger, his pain, his refusal to forgive. But Catherine's voice echoed in his memory, the last words she'd spoken before fever took her. Keep fighting, David. Don't give up. Don't let this break you. And Michael's face, so like Ethan's, blue lips and still chest in a life cut short because a weak man took a bribe. I'll fight, David said, his voice steady despite everything. For Catherine, for Michael, for your boys. He paused, his eyes meeting Elena's directly. And for you. The night became a blur of activity. Grace made coffee that could strip paint while Isaiah went out to gather allies. Elena wrote letters to people who might testify her hand cramping from the effort, but refusing to stop. David organized their evidence into a coherent narrative, building the case against Blackwell piece by piece. By midnight, they had commitments from 6 townspeople willing to speak against Blackwell. Tom Wilson, whose wife died in the fever. Sarah Jenkins, whose husband's business Blackwell threatened. Robert Martinez, whose farm Blackwell bought for a fraction of its value. 3 others, each with their own story of Blackwell's cruelty, each terrified but willing to stand up. It's not enough, Isaiah said, returning from his final errand, his face grim. We need someone unimpeachable, someone Blackwell can't discredit. What about Reverend Cross? Grace suggested. He's been Blackwell's puppet, but he's also a man of God. If he could be convinced to tell the truth, Cross is terrified of Blackwell. Elena shook her head. There's something in his past that Blackwell holds over him. I could see it in his eyes when he turned me away from the church. Everyone has something in their past. David's voice was thoughtful. The question is whether the shame of silence outweighs the shame of exposure. I'll talk to him. Elena stood, stretching muscles stiff from hours of work. Before the meeting, one more try. He turned you away in the blizzard. David's voice carried concern. Left your son to die. I know. Elena's jaw was set. But I have to believe there's still some goodness in him. Some part that remembers why he became a minister in the first place. And if there isn't, then we go into that meeting without him and hope it's enough. Elena continued rifling through Marcus's papers, looking for anything else that might help their case. Most of it was predictable gambling debts, liquor bills, pawned items listed with painful specificity. But then her eye caught on a notation in the margin of the ledger, written in Marcus's unsteady hand but underlined 3 times as if for emphasis. Survey confirms black gold under North Acreage. HB doesn't know. My insurance. Elena's breath caught. David, look at this. He crossed to her side, reading over her shoulder. What does that mean, black gold? Isaiah's voice carried sudden understanding. That's oil. Your husband thought there was oil under that land. Oil, Elena's mind raced. That's why he wouldn't sell, why he kept the land when he gambled away everything else. And if Blackwell knew, David's voice was hard, it wasn't just about the railroad. It was about oil deposits worth 10 times, 100 times what the land would bring from the railway. That's why Marcus died. Elena felt the pieces falling into place. He knew something Blackwell wanted hidden. Blackwell couldn't risk him talking. The card game. David's eyes were sharp, now focused. It wasn't about cheating. It was execution dressed up as frontier justice. We need to verify this. Isaiah's voice was practical. If there really is oil, and if Blackwell knew about it, that's motive for murder. David finished. Concrete, provable motive. How do we verify it? Elena looked around the table. We don't have time to bring in surveyors, but Blackwell might have his own survey. Isaiah's voice carried possibility. If he knew about the oil, he'd have documented it. Would have needed proof before making his move. Where would he keep something like that? His office safe. David and Isaiah spoke simultaneously. The same safe Porter broke into to get the loan documents. Elena felt hope rising. He might go back for us. Or Owen might. David's voice was thoughtful. Isaiah, what do you know about the judge's son, Owen Blackwell? Isaiah's expression darkened. He's weak, scared of his father. Does what he's told, even when it tears him up inside, does he have a conscience? Maybe, Isaiah sounded uncertain. Hard to tell when fear's got such a grip on a man. Then we find out, Elena's voice was determined. For the meeting, we give Owen Blackwell a choice: help us expose his father or go down with him. That's dangerous. Grace spoke up for the first time in an hour. If Owen tells his father, he won't. Elena's voice carried certainty she didn't entirely feel. I saw his eyes when he delivered Blackwell's threats. He's ashamed of what his father's become. Ashamed of what he's been forced to do. You're betting a lot on a man you barely know. David's voice was careful. I'm betting on the fact that most people want to do right. Elena met his gaze. They just need someone to give them permission, to show them it's possible to stand up. The conversation continued into the early morning hours, plans evolving and adapting as they identified obstacles and solutions. By 3 a.m., Elena's eyes burned with exhaustion, but her mind refused to rest. There's something else. She spoke suddenly, a memory surfacing. The night Marcus died. Nathan said he heard him talking to himself before he left for the card game. Said something about the land being worth more than Blackwell knew. What exactly did he say? David leaned forward. Elena closed her eyes, trying to remember Nathan's exact words. Something like, that land's going to make us rich. Blackwell can rot before I sell. And then her eyes snapped open. My insurance. He was going to blackmail Blackwell. Isaiah's voice carried grim satisfaction. Threatened to expose the oil deposits if Blackwell didn't back off. And Blackwell killed him for it. David's voice was flat. Set up the card game, made sure Marcus looked like a cheater, had someone shoot him before he could talk. Elena felt cold despite the fire. Who shot him? The sheriff said one of the other players, but he never said which one. Silence. Then Grace spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Owen Blackwell was at that game. I heard it from Martha Price. She saw him leaving the saloon that night, his hands shaking, his face white as death. The implications settled over them like snow, cold and suffocating. Blackwell made his own son pull the trigger. David's voice carried horror. Made Owen murder a man to protect the family secret. If that's true, Elena's voice shook. If Owen killed Marcus on his father's orders, then we have leverage, Isaiah finished. Owen's been living with that guilt for 2 weeks. If we can get him to confess, he hangs. Grace's voice was sharp. You'd be asking a boy to condemn himself, a boy who murdered Elena's husband. David's tone was hard. A boy who was forced to murder by a father he feared. Elena corrected, her voice carrying unexpected compassion. Owen's as much Blackwell's victim as any of us. You'd defend your husband's killer. David stared at her. I'd give him the chance my husband never gave your family. Elena's voice was steady. The chance to choose right over wrong, to stand up to a tyrant, to be more than fear made him. She looked around the table, meeting each person's eyes. We're not like Blackwell. We don't force people. We don't manipulate them with fear. We give them the truth and let them choose. That's a hell of a risk. Isaiah's voice carried respect despite his words. Then it's a risk I'll take. Dawn crept through the windows, pale and cold. They'd been awake all night and exhaustion pulled at Elena's bones, but there was no time for rest. I'll go see Reverend Cross this morning, Elena said, her voice hoarse. David, you try to approach Owen. See if he'll meet with us privately. And if he won't, David's expression was skeptical. Then we go into that meeting with what we have and pray it's enough. Grace stood, her small frame radiating determination. I'll spread the word. Make sure everyone knows to be at the church tomorrow. The more witnesses, the harder it'll be for Blackwell to control the narrative. Isaiah nodded. I'll keep gathering testimony. The more people willing to speak, the stronger our case. They dispersed to their tasks, soldiers preparing for a battle. None of them were certain they could win. Elena found Reverend Cross in the church vestry, his hands clasped in what might have been prayer, or might have been simple despair. The morning light filtered through stained glass, painting his gaunt face in shades of red and gold. Reverend? He startled, nearly knocking over a candle. Mrs. Morrison, you shouldn't be here. I need to talk to you. I have nothing to say. Then listen. Elena stepped closer, her voice firm. I know Blackwell has something on you. I don't know what, and I don't care. But I do know you became a minister for a reason. You wanted to help people, to guide them toward God, toward goodness. That was a long time ago. Cross's voice was hollow. It doesn't have to be. She pulled out the telegram, the damning evidence of Blackwell's conspiracy. Read this. Read what it says. Cross's hands trembled as he took the paper. His face went white as he absorbed the words as he read Marcus's confession on the back. Dear God, his whisper was barely audible. Blackwell paid my husband to delay that telegram. Elena's voice was relentless. 19 people died, including Dr. Mercer's wife and child, and Blackwell used the chaos to buy up land at prices people would never have accepted otherwise. I didn't know. Cross's voice was a whisper. I knew he was ruthless, but this, you can make it right, Elena pressed. Tomorrow at the meeting. If you speak against Blackwell, if you tell the truth, if I speak against Blackwell, he'll destroy me. Cross looked up, his eyes haunted. He'll tell everyone about my past, what I was before I found God. What past could be worse than this? Elena gestured at the telegram. What sin could be greater than helping a murderer stay in power? Cross sank into a chair, his head in his hands. Before I found God, I was a gambler, a cheat. I hurt people, ruined families. He looked up, shame written across every line of his face. Blackwell knows because he was one of the men I cheated. 20 years ago in a game in Fort Worth. I took everything he had left him with nothing. He's held that over me ever since, waiting for the right moment to collect payment. And if that comes out, I'll lose everything. Cross's voice broke. My congregation, my purpose, my life. And if it doesn't come out, Elena's voice was sharp. If you stay silent while Blackwell destroys my family, can you live with that? Can you face God knowing you protected a monster? Silence. Cross's shoulders shook. I don't know if I'm strong enough. Then let me tell you something about strength. Elena knelt beside him, forcing him to meet her eyes. Strength isn't never falling. It's getting up. It's facing the consequences of your past instead of hiding from them. It's choosing to be better even when it costs you everything. You sound like you're preaching. Maybe I am. Elena's voice softened. But it's a sermon you need to hear. She stood, leaving the telegram in his lap. The meeting is tomorrow at noon. I'll be there fighting for my children's future. The question is, will you be fighting beside me or cowering in Blackwell's shadow? She left without waiting for an answer, her heart pounding, her hands shaking. She'd done what she could. The rest was up to Cross and whatever remained of his conscience. David found Owen Blackwell behind the sheriff's office, cleaning his gun, with hands that trembled so badly he kept dropping the cleaning rod. The young man looked like he hadn't slept in days, eyes bloodshot, face pale, movements jerky with barely contained panic. Deputy Blackwell. Owen jumped, nearly dropping the gun. Dr. Mercer. What? He swallowed hard. What are you doing here? I wanted to talk to you. David kept his voice neutral, non-threatening. About your father. Owen's face went from pale to gray. I got nothing to say about that. I think you do. David stepped closer. I think you've got plenty to say. You're just too scared to say it. I don't know what you're talking about. Marcus Morrison. David watched Owen's face carefully. The card game, the shooting. Owen's hands started shaking worse. He was cheating. Everyone saw. Did they? David's voice was soft. Or did they see what your father wanted them to see? You need to leave. Owen's voice rose, panic evident. Now, before someone sees us talking. I'm not leaving until you hear what I have to say. David pulled out Marcus's ledger, open to the notation about oil. Your father knew there was oil under Elena Morrison's land. Marcus knew too. Was going to expose it, maybe blackmail your father with the information. David paused, letting that sink in. So your father arranged a card game. Made sure Marcus looked like a cheater. Made sure someone would shoot him before he could talk. Owen's face was white as bone. You can't prove any of that. Can I? David's voice was hard. Grace Grant saw you leaving the saloon that night. Said your hands were shaking, your face white as death. Said you looked like a man who'd just committed murder. That don't mean nothing. It means everything. David stepped closer. Your father made you pull that trigger, didn't he? Made you kill a man to protect the family secret. Owen's gun clattered to the ground. His whole body was shaking, now tears streaming down his face. I didn't want to. His voice broke. God, I didn't want to. But Pa said he said if I didn't do it, we'd lose everything. Said Morrison was going to destroy us. So you shot him. I shot him. Owen's voice was barely audible. Put the marked cards in his pocket after. Made it look like he was cheating when he wasn't. He looked at David with eyes full of anguish. I killed an innocent man because my father told me to. Because I was too scared to say no. David felt his anger warring with unexpected pity. This wasn't a monster standing before him, just a weak man destroyed by a stronger one, just another of Blackwell's victims. You can make it right. David's voice gentled. Tomorrow at the town meeting. You can tell the truth. Expose what your father did. I'll hang. Owen's voice was flat. You're asking me to sign my own death warrant. Maybe, David didn't lie. Or maybe the judge will show mercy, given that you were coerced. That you confessed voluntarily. That you helped stop your father from destroying another family. He paused. Either way, living with the truth might be better than living with the lie. Owen was silent for a long moment. Then, he'll kill me if I betray him. He'll kill you anyway. David's voice was certain. Eventually, when you're no longer useful, when you know too much. Men like your father don't leave loose ends. What about the survey? Owen's voice was barely above a whisper. The oil survey. Do you have it? David's heart leaped. You know about it. Pa keeps it in his safe. Owen's words came faster now, desperation lending them speed. Along with other things, forged documents, falsified deeds, evidence of bribes paid to sheriffs and judges across 3 counties. Can you get them? Owen laughed a sound like breaking glass. Can I get them? I'm the only one besides Pa who knows the combination. He made me memorize it in case something happened to him. He looked at David directly. I could get them tonight. Leave them somewhere you could find them. Why? David studied him carefully. Why help us now? Because I'm tired. Owen's voice was heavy with exhaustion beyond his years. Tired of being scared. Tired of doing terrible things. Tired of being my father's weapon. He met David's eyes. And because Mrs. Morrison was right, fear is just a weapon. Take it away and men like my father have nothing. The meeting is tomorrow noon, David said quietly. Whatever you're going to do, do it before then. Owen nodded slowly. Then he bent and picked up his gun, holstering it with hands that had stopped shaking. Dr. Mercer, his voice was steadier now. Tell Mrs. Morrison I'm sorry, for her husband, for everything. Tell her yourself tomorrow. David left Owen standing behind the sheriff's office, a young man wrestling with demons. David knew too well. The weight of guilt, the burden of impossible choices, the question of whether redemption was possible after terrible sins. That evening, as the town prepared for what would be the most explosive meeting in Coulter Springs' history, Elena gathered her sons close. Tomorrow's important. She kept her voice calm despite the fear churning in her stomach. Tomorrow we fight for our future. Can we come? Liam asked. No, baby. Elena kissed his forehead. You stay here with Mrs. Grace. But I need you to be brave. Can you do that? I'm always brave. Liam's chin lifted with childish confidence. I know you are. Nathan was quieter, his young face grave. Mama, make him pay. Make Blackwell pay for what he did. For what he made us lose. I will. Elena met her eldest son's eyes. I promise. As the boys fell asleep, Elena stood at the window and looked toward the center of town where the church waited. Tomorrow that building would become a battlefield. Tomorrow she would face down the man who tried to destroy her family. Tomorrow she would win or lose everything. Morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. Elena dressed carefully, choosing the one good dress she'd kept from before Marcus's gambling stripped them of everything decent. Black wool, simple but dignified. Armor for the battle ahead. Nathan helped Liam and Ethan dress while Elena braided her hair with hands that refused to stop trembling. Through the window, she could see townspeople already moving toward the church, drawn by curiosity or duty, or the simple human hunger to witness conflict. You don't have to do this, David spoke from the doorway, his voice carrying concern he no longer bothered to hide. We could still leave. Take the boys and disappear before Blackwell knows you're gone. Running won't save us. Elena's voice was steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. He'll hunt us down. Use the law, his money, his connections. Better to end this here where people can see what he is. She turned to face him. Besides, I'm done running, done being afraid, done letting men like Blackwell make me small. David crossed the room and took her hands in his grip warm and steady. You've never been small, Elena Morrison. You've been the bravest person I've ever known. The words broke something loose in her chest, tears threatening to spill despite her determination to stay strong. Don't, she pulled one hand free to touch his face. Don't make me cry before I have to face that man. Then I'll say it after. David's voice was low and tense. After we win, after Blackwell's finished. I have things I need to tell you, things that have been building since the night I pulled you from that blizzard, since I watched you refuse to break despite everything the world threw at you. His thumb traced the line of her jaw. Things about how you've made me want to live again instead of just survive. How your boys have reminded me what it means to hope. How you've mama. Nathan's voice interrupted from across the room, urgent. People are filling the church. If we're going, we need to go now. Elena held David's gaze for one more heartbeat, memorizing the warmth in his eyes, the promise in his touch. Then she stepped back and squared her shoulders. Let's finish this. The church was already packed when they arrived, every pew filled, townspeople standing along the walls. A hush fell as Elena entered with David at her side, Isaiah and Grace flanking them. The crowd parted like water before stone whispers rising in their wake. Look at her, walking in like she owns the place. After what her husband did, got some nerve showing her face. Elena kept her head high and walked straight toward the front where Judge Harrison Blackwell waited. He sat in what should have been the minister's chair, positioned like a king on a throne, his face carrying the smug confidence of a man who'd never lost a battle. Blackwell was older than Elena remembered, perhaps 55, with silver threading through dark hair and lines carved deep around cold eyes. He wore an expensive suit, a gold watch chain gleaming across his vest, every inch of him proclaiming wealth and power. Mrs. Morrison, Blackwell's voice carried through the silent church, smooth as oil on water. How kind of you to join us. I believe we have matters to discuss. Elena walked forward until she stood directly before him, close enough to see the calculation in his eyes, the certainty that he'd already won. I believe we do, Judge Blackwell. Before we begin, Blackwell rose, his voice projecting to the packed room. I want to thank everyone for coming. This meeting concerns the welfare of our entire community, not just the unfortunate situation of one family. Get on with it, Cornelius. Tom Wilson's voice rose from somewhere in the middle pews. Some of us got work waiting. Blackwell's eyes flickered with annoyance, but his smile didn't waver. Very well. As you all know, the late Marcus Morrison left substantial debts to the First Bank of Coulter Springs. $500 to be precise. His widow has failed to make any arrangements for repayment, and this debt threatens the stability of our entire financial system. Because the debt is a lie, Elena's voice cut through his speech like a blade through silk. My husband borrowed $50 from your bank, Judge Blackwell, not $500, and he paid it back 6 months before he died. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Blackwell's smile tightened fractionally. Do you have proof of this claim, Mrs. Morrison? I do. Elena held up Marcus's ledger, the pages marked where she'd found the evidence. My husband's own records showed the original loan amount and its repayment, $50, paid in full. Blackwell laughed softly, the sound carrying condescension like perfume. A gambling man's personal accounts. Hardly reliable evidence. I have official bank documents that tell a different story. Documents you falsified. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. The crowd's murmuring grew louder, more agitated. David stepped forward, drawing gasps from townspeople who hadn't seen the hermit doctor in 3 years. I have records showing you've inflated debts before Judge. The Wilson farm, the Campbell property, the Martinez ranch. Every piece of land along the proposed railway route that you've acquired in the past 3 years through remarkably similar circumstances. He pulled out his documentation, spreading papers on the table where everyone could see. Dates, amounts, patterns that can't be explained by coincidence. Blackwell's smile finally cracked. Dr. Mercer, I wondered when you'd emerge from your cave. Tell me, does the widow know you've been watching this town like some obsessed phantom, collecting gossip and rumors while refusing to practice the medicine that might have saved lives? Don't. Elena's voice was sharp, protective. Don't you dare try to shame him for grieving. Grieving, Blackwell's eyebrows rose. Is that what we're calling it? 3 years of abandonment? 3 years of leaving this town without medical care while he nursed his broken heart on that mountainside. He turned to address the crowd directly. How many of you lost loved ones in that time? How many deaths might have been prevented if our brilliant doctor hadn't been too consumed by self-pity to do his job? Angry mutters rose from several quarters. Martha, the woman who'd accosted them before, stood with tears streaming down her face. My grief is my own business. David's voice was steady, though Elena could see his hands trembling. But your crimes are everyone's business. You've been stealing from this town for years, Judge Blackwell, using your position to enrich yourself at the expense of widows, orphans, anyone too weak to fight back. These are serious accusations, Doctor. Blackwell's voice dropped to something dangerous. I hope you can back them up. I can. David pulled out the sheaf of papers he'd spent 3 years compiling. Property records, bank documents, testimony from people you've cheated. He handed them to Deputy Porter, who'd positioned himself near the front specifically for this moment. And something else, something that proves you're not just a thief, but a murderer. The word hit like a thunderclap. The church erupted in shocked whispers. Blackwell's face went pale, then red with fury. How dare you 3 years ago? David's voice rose above the noise commanding attention. A telegram was sent from Fort Worth warning of a scarlet fever outbreak. That telegram should have reached me in time to quarantine my family to save lives. Instead, it was delayed by 2 days. 2 days in which 19 people died. He paused, letting the weight of that number settle over the crowd. 19 people, men, women, children, all dead because someone held that warning. That's ancient history. Blackwell's voice carried strain, now control slipping. You can't prove I can prove everything. David held up the telegram Elena had found. This is the original warning. It was found in Marcus Morrison's belongings. He turned the paper so the crowd could see the back, along with a note in his own handwriting confessing that you paid him $100 to hold the telegram until after the 15th. $100 to let 19 people die. The silence that followed was absolute. Elena watched faces in the crowd shift from skepticism to horror, watched the slow dawn of understanding that their judge, their banker, their benefactor was something far darker. Fraud. Blackwell's voice was desperate now, his composure shattering. Forgery. That telegram is fake. It's genuine. Deputy Porter stepped forward, his young face grim. The telegraph office seal is authentic. The date stamp matches their records. I verified it myself, Reeves. Blackwell's voice sharpened with warning. I'm warning you. Warning me of what Sir Porter's voice carried steel. Elena hadn't heard before. That you'll stop paying my sister's medical bills? You already did that. The grants helped me settle the account last week. He pulled another document from his vest. And while I was at it, I found this in your office safe. The original loan agreement between Marcus Morrison and the bank. The amount is clearly $50, not $500. You broke into my safe. Blackwell's face was purple now, veins standing out on his forehead. I investigated suspected fraud. Porter's voice was calm. That's my job. The job you gave me. Or did you expect me to look the other way while you robbed a widow? The crowd's muttering grew louder, angrier. Elena saw faces she recognized, people who'd turned her away. People who'd closed their doors, now looking at Blackwell with dawning betrayal. This is a conspiracy. Blackwell's voice rose to a shout. A plot by outsiders and malcontents to destroy an honest businessman. You're all being manipulated. Honest Eliza Simmons stood suddenly, her thin frame trembling, but her voice clear. You call yourself Honest Harrison Blackwell. Every head turned toward the elderly widow. Elena held her breath, hoping the woman would find the courage to speak. My husband worked at the telegraph office for 20 years. Eliza's voice grew stronger with each word. He knew every message that came through. He told me about the fever warning, told me how you paid Marcus Morrison to delay it, told me what happened to anyone who crossed you. Eliza, sit down. Blackwell's voice had turned dangerous. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. Eliza's voice broke but didn't stop. I've kept silent for 3 years because I was scared. Because you made me scared. My husband died knowing he'd been part of something terrible, knowing he hadn't stopped you when he should have. Her voice rose trembling with emotion. But I'm an old woman now, Harrison Blackwell. I've got nothing left you can take. So I'm speaking up. I'm telling the truth. You paid Marcus Morrison to delay that warning. You let 19 people die so you could buy their land cheap. And my husband knew it. She's lying. Blackwell turned to the crowd. She's a confused old woman. I ain't confused. Eliza's voice was sharp. And I ain't lying. You're a murderer, Harrison Blackwell. Maybe you didn't pull a trigger, but you killed those people, sure as if you had. She's right. Another voice rose, this one belonging to Tom Wilson. Blackwell pressured me to sell my farm 3 days after Mary died. Said if I didn't accept his offer, he'd call in loans I never took. Threatened my children. Me too. Sarah Jenkins stood, her face flushed. He threatened my husband's business if we didn't support his version of events. That's why I couldn't help you, Mrs. Morrison. I wanted to, but I was too afraid. One by one, voices joined the chorus. Years of fear and silence breaking apart like ice in spring thaw. People who'd been hurt, cheated, threatened. People who'd carried shame and guilt for standing by while Blackwell destroyed lives. Elena watched the tide turn, watched Blackwell's control crumble as the town he'd terrorized finally found its voice. This is madness. Blackwell's voice rose to a scream. You're all deluded. I own this town. The bank, the cattle association, half the businesses on Main Street. You think you can stand against me? He looked around wildly. Without me, you're nothing. I made this town. I built it from dirt and scrub. I brought the railroad here. I created your prosperity. You created our fear. The voice came from the back of the church, and Elena's breath caught it as Reverend Cross stepped forward. Ezekiel, Blackwell's voice carried warning. Think carefully about what you're doing. I've thought about nothing else for 10 years. Cross's voice was steady despite the paleness of his face. 10 years you've held my past over me like a sword. Made me complicit in your schemes. Made me turn away a mother and her dying child in a blizzard. His voice cracked but didn't break. I've been a coward, a hypocrite, everything I preach against. But I'm done being controlled. Cross turned to face the congregation, his face carrying shame and determination in equal measure. Before I found my calling, I was a gambler, a cheat. I hurt people for money, ruined families. Harrison Blackwell was one of my victims 20 years ago in Fort Worth. I took everything he had. Murmurs rose, but Cross continued. He's used that knowledge to control me ever since. Made me his puppet. Made me turn away anyone who opposed him. But that ends now. He faced Blackwell directly. Because what I did 20 years ago, as terrible as it was, doesn't compare to what you've done. I cheated you at cards, Harrison. You murdered children for profit. Silence. Then Cross spoke the words that would change everything. And you murdered your business partner. The church erupted. Blackwell lunged forward, but Isaiah caught him, holding him back with ease. You have no proof. Blackwell's voice was desperate. You lying, cheating, I was there. Cross's voice cut through the chaos. 10 years ago, you and James Thornton had that surveying business. You just discovered the railway route, knew it would make you both rich. But you didn't want to share. He paused, letting the weight of memory settle. I saw you push him off the ridge, watched you arrange his body to make it look like an accident. You threatened to expose my past if I ever spoke of Ed. So I stayed silent. Became a minister, thought I could atone for my sins by doing good. His voice broke. But staying silent about murder isn't atonement. It's complicity. Lies. Lies. Blackwell was struggling against Isaiah's grip. His carefully constructed image completely shattered. You have no witnesses, no evidence. I'm a witness. The voice came from near the door, young and shaking. And I have evidence. Owen Blackwell stepped into view carrying a leather satchel. His face was pale, his hands trembling, but his voice held conviction Elena hadn't heard before. Pa. Owen's voice cracked on the word. I'm sorry, but I can't do this anymore. Owen, don't. Blackwell's voice carried warning and desperation. Think about what you're doing. Think about your future. I am thinking about my future. Owen moved down the aisle, his eyes fixed on his father. I'm thinking I don't want to be you. Don't want to become a man who uses fear and violence to get what he wants. He reached the front and pulled documents from the satchel. These are Pa's private ledgers. The real accounts showing bribes paid to sheriffs and judges across 3 counties, forged documents, falsified deeds, everything he's done to build his empire. Owen's voice steadied. And evidence of oil deposits under Mrs. Morrison's land. That's what this was really about, not the railroad. Oil worth 10 times what any railway would pay. He turned to Elena, his eyes swimming with tears. Marcus Morrison knew about the oil, was going to expose it, maybe blackmail Pa. So Pa arranged a card game, made sure your husband looked like a cheater. Owen's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, and Pa made me pull the trigger. The confession hit like a physical blow. Elena felt her knees weaken, felt David's hand on her arm, keeping her upright. Around them, the crowd was frozen in shock. "You killed my husband." Elena's voice was hollow. "On your father's orders." Owen nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Morrison. I didn't want to. God, I didn't want to. But Pa said if I didn't do it, we'd lose everything. Said Morrison was going to destroy us." His voice broke completely. "I put the marked cards in his pocket after he was dead. Made it look like cheating when he wasn't. I'm a murderer because I was too scared to say no to my father." Blackwell had gone very still, his face ashen. Around them, the church was silent, as a tomb, every eye fixed on the broken young man, confessing patricide and murder both. "Owen." Blackwell's voice was different now, softer. "Son, you don't know what you're saying. You're confused." "I'm not confused." Owen's voice carried certainty through the tears. "I've been living with this guilt for 2 weeks. Waking up every night, seeing Marcus Morrison's face, seeing the moment I pulled that trigger." He looked at Elena directly. "I deserve to hang for what I did. I know that. But I wanted you to know the truth first. Wanted everyone to know what my father made me become." Sheriff Garrett pushed through the crowd, his weathered face grave. "Owen Blackwell, I'm placing you under arrest for the murder of Marcus Morrison." Owen nodded, extending his wrist for the handcuffs without resistance. But Garrett's attention shifted to the elder Blackwell. "Harrison Blackwell, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, bribery, and suspicion of murder in the death of James Thornton. You can't arrest me." Blackwell's voice rose to a scream. "I'm a judge. I am the law in this town." "Not anymore." Garrett's voice was flat. "You're just a man who's going to face justice." Blackwell made a final desperate lunge, not toward the door but toward Elena. His face was twisted with hatred, hands reaching for her throat. "This is your doing." His voice was pure venom. "You and that hermit doctor. I'll destroy you both." Isaiah caught him before he reached her, pinning his arms with the efficiency of a man who had wrestled far stronger opponents. "Easy there, Judge. Don't make this worse than it is. Get your hands off me." Blackwell struggled. "Do you know who I am?" "Yeah." Isaiah's voice was cold. "You're a man who pays other men to let children die. That's who you are." Garrett and Porter secured Blackwell in handcuffs, but he kept screaming threats and curses as they dragged him toward the door. His carefully constructed facade had shattered completely, revealing the desperate, frightened man beneath. "I'll destroy you all." His voice echoed through the church. "You hear me? I own this town. I'll ruin every one of you." But the crowd was already turning away, their former master reduced to a raging, impotent figure, being hauled away by lawmen to young he'd once controlled. When the doors closed behind Blackwell and Owen, both the church erupted. Cheers mixed with weeping. People embraced, apologized, confessed their own complicity in years of silence. Years of fear lifted like fog burning away under sunlight. Elena stood in the center of it all, her body shaking so hard she could barely stand. David's arms came around her, holding her upright as reaction finally hit. "It's over." His voice was rough in her ear. "You did it. We did it. We." Elena turned in his arms, pressing her face against his chest. The word felt like benediction, like promise, like the beginning of something she was finally brave enough to name. Around them, townspeople approached to express their remorse, their gratitude, their shame at having turned her away. Mrs. Price from the boarding house wept openly. Mr. Patterson from the general store offered credit and supplies. Martha apologized for her harsh words to David, acknowledging her grief had made her cruel. Reverend Cross approached last, his face carrying peace Elena hadn't seen before. "Mrs. Morrison," his voice was hoarse from confession. "Dr. Mercer, I owe you more than words can express. You told the truth when it mattered." Elena's voice was gentle. That takes more courage than most people ever find. What will you do now? David asked. Face the consequences. Cross's voice was steady. Whatever they are. But I'll face them honest without Blackwell's shadow over me. He paused, his eyes holding Elena's. Thank you for giving me that chance. For showing me that redemption is possible even after terrible mistakes. As Cross walked away, Isaiah and Grace approached with news that would shape everything to come. The railways confirmed they'll pay fair price for the right-of-way. Isaiah's voice carried satisfaction. And there's oil companies already asking about lease agreements for the deposits. Elena's mind spun with the implications. Her sons would never know poverty again, would never know hunger or fear, or the uncertainty that had plagued her entire marriage. What will you do with it all? Grace asked gently. The money, the land, the future. Elena looked at David, saw the question in his eyes that matched the one in her heart. I don't know yet. Her voice was honest. But I know I won't make decisions alone anymore. I've learned that partners are worth more than gold. David's smile was the first real one she'd seen from him, transforming his face from haunted to hopeful. Partners, he agreed softly. Around them, Coulter Springs was transforming. Blackwell's shadow lifting revealed a town that had once been good, that could be good again. People who'd been cruel from fear could choose kindness now. People who'd been silent could speak. And Elena Morrison, widow and mother and warrior, stood in the center of it all, with her head high and her heart full, and the beginning of belief that maybe, just maybe, broken things could heal. The battle was won. But the real victory, the choosing to love again after loss, to trust again after betrayal, to build again after everything was torn down, that battle was just beginning. 3 months later, spring arrived in the Texas Panhandle with wildflowers and warming winds. The world that had tried to kill them in winter now burst with life and color and possibility. Elena stood in the doorway of her home, no longer the cramped cabin Marcus had kept them in, but a proper house built with oil lease money on land that truly belonged to her sons. Through the window, she could see Nathan teaching Liam to ride the horse she'd bought him. Ethan played in the garden, his lungs finally clear, his laughter ringing across the fields. Mama, look. Ethan ran toward her, his small hands cupping something precious. I found a rabbit hole. Can we keep them? Rabbits need to stay with their families, baby. Elena knelt to his level, brushing dirt from his shirt. Just like you need to stay with yours. Are we a family now? Ethan's solemn eyes studied her face. With Dr. David, the question didn't surprise her. The boys had been asking variations of it for weeks, their hope barely contained. What do you think? I think yes. Ethan nodded firmly. He comes for dinner every night. He helps Nathan with reading. He taught Liam about medicine. And he looks at you the way Papa used to look at whiskey bottles. Elena choked on a surprised laughter. Ethan Morrison, where do you get these observations? I watch people. Ethan shrugged. It's more interesting than talking. She hugged her youngest close, marveling at the child who'd nearly died in a blizzard and now philosophized about love with the wisdom of someone 3 times his age. Come on. She stood, taking his hand. Let's see what your brothers are doing. The homestead had transformed over the past months. The 60 acres that Blackwell had tried to steal now thrived under careful management. The railroad had paid generously for the right-of-way, and the oil companies were negotiating lease terms that would secure the Morrison boys' futures for generations. But more than money had changed. The land itself seemed different, freed from Marcus's neglect and Blackwell's malice. Under Elena's care, with David's help and Isaiah's strong back, the property had become what it was always meant to be: home. She found Nathan and Liam at the fence line working alongside David to repair a broken post. The sight of them together, her sons and the man who'd saved them, still made her chest tight with emotion she was only beginning to name. That's it, Nathan. David's voice was patient, warm. Hold it steady. Liam, hand me the hammer. I can do it, Liam protested. I'm strong enough. I know you are. David's tone was gentle. But your brother needs the practice, and you're better at holding things steady. Liam accepted this with the grace of a child who'd learned David's praise was always earned, never empty. Looking good, Elena called out, leaning against the fence. David looked up, and there it was, the soft expression Ethan had described, the warmth in his eyes that still caught Elena off guard despite seeing it daily. Almost done. He straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead. This fence was about ready to fall over. Like most things around here when I inherited them. Elena's voice carried teasing warmth. Not anymore. David's eyes swept the homestead. You've done remarkable work, Elena. We've done remarkable work. She emphasized the plural deliberately. I couldn't have managed without you, Mama. Liam tugged her sleeve, his young face bright with excitement. Tell Dr. David about the letter. What letter the railroad president wrote? Elena felt heat rise to her cheeks. Apparently word of what happened with Blackwell reached their headquarters. They want to hold some kind of ceremony, give me an award for courage. Elena, that's wonderful. David's smile was genuine. It's unnecessary, she shifted uncomfortably. I didn't fight Blackwell for recognition. No, David moved closer. You fought him because it was right. That's exactly why it matters. People need to hear your story, see that one person can stand against corruption and win. I just want to live quietly. Elena's voice was soft. Raise my boys. Build something that lasts. And you will. David's voice carried certainty, but you can also inspire others. Show them that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it. You sound like you've been practicing that speech. Maybe I have. David's smile turned sheepish. I've been thinking about it a lot, about what you've taught me, what your boys have shown me. He paused, his expression growing serious. About how you've all reminded me that life is for living, not just surviving. That evening after the boys were asleep, Elena and David sat on the porch watching stars emerge. The easy silence between them had developed over months of shared meals, shared work, shared confidences. I went to see the graves today. David spoke quietly, his voice carrying across the darkness. Catherine and Michael. Elena's heart clenched. How was it different? He was silent for a moment. At first visiting them felt like betrayal, being happy building a new life, like I was leaving them behind. And now it feels like continuation. David's voice held wonder. Like the love I had for them doesn't disappear just because I have room for more. He turned to look at her, his face half shadowed in moonlight. I talked to Catherine today. Told her about you, about the boys. His voice caught. I think she'd like you. Think she'd approve. I think I'd like her too. Elena's voice was gentle. She would have been fierce about protecting children. David continued, just like you, would have marched into that church and given Blackwell both barrels. A smile touched his lips. Michael would have wanted to be friends with Nathan and Liam, would have followed Ethan around trying to make him laugh. They sound wonderful. They were. David's voice was thick with emotion. They were everything. Silence settled between them, comfortable and weighted with unspoken things. Elena. David's voice changed, became careful. I've been offered a position. Official town doctor of Coulter Springs. The council voted unanimously. David, that's wonderful. Elena sat up straighter, genuine joy flooding through her. It means staying here permanently. He continued. Building a practice again. Facing my past every day, the patients I couldn't save, the years I hid away, the guilt I'm still carrying. Are you ready for that? I don't know. David's honesty was painful and perfect, but I know I want to try, especially if you're here, especially if I have a reason to keep moving forward instead of looking back. The words hung between them, weighted with meaning neither had fully expressed until this moment. David. Elena's voice was barely above a whisper. What exactly are you asking? I'm asking. He drew a deep breath, steadying it himself. I'm asking if there might be room in your life for a broken doctor who's still learning how to live again. I'm asking if those 3 boys inside might someday accept me as more than a friend. He paused, his voice dropping lower. I'm asking if you could ever see me as someone worth loving. Elena's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of overwhelming emotion at this man who'd emerged from grief's deepest valley to stand beside her. David Mercer, she said softly, I've seen you save my son's life, seen you stand against a corrupt judge without flinching, watched you teach my boys with patience and kindness their own father never showed. She reached out, taking his face in her hands, and I've felt my heart crack open for the first time in years because of you. Felt hope when I'd given up on it. Felt safe when I'd forgotten what safety was. Elena, I'm not finished. She smiled through her tears. I don't know what I'm ready for. I don't know if I can promise forever. I promised that once before and it nearly destroyed me. She paused, making sure he heard every word. But I can promise you this, I want to find out. Want to walk this road with you and see where it leads. Want to give us the chance we both deserve. Is that enough? It's more than enough. David's voice was rough with emotion. It's everything. When he kissed her, it was gentle, a question rather than a demand. Elena answered by pulling him closer, letting herself feel without the shadow of fear that had haunted her entire marriage. You. They broke apart to find Liam standing in the doorway, his face scrunched in theatrical disgust. Liam Morrison. Elena's voice carried warning. What are you doing out of bed? I heard talking. His eyes moved between them. Then I heard kissing sounds. Gross. Go back to bed. Are you and Dr. David getting married? Elena and David exchanged glances, surprised by the directness of an 8-year-old's question. We're talking about important things, Elena said carefully. Grown-up things. That means yes. Liam nodded sagely. I'll tell Nathan and Ethan in the morning. Liam. But he was already gone, his footsteps pattering back down the hall. Well, David's voice was dry. That's one way to have the conversation. Elena laughed despite herself, the sound bubbling up from somewhere deep and genuine. Nothing stays secret with the three boys. I suppose not. He pulled her close again. For what it's worth, I'm not opposed to the direction Liam's thinking is taking. Neither am I. Elena rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. But let's take our time. Do this right. No rushing. No rushing. David agreed. We've both been burned by promises made too quickly. Let's build this slow and sure. One day at a time. One day at a time. The summer that followed was golden. David officially reopened his medical practice, and patients who'd once cursed his absence now filled his waiting room. Elena's land yielded its first profitable crop. The boys flourished under the combined attention of two adults who loved them. Blackwell's trial came and went in the county seat. He was convicted of fraud conspiracy and the murder of James Thornton, sentenced to 15 years in the territorial prison. Owen received 10 years for killing Marcus under coercion, the judge showing mercy for his voluntary confession and cooperation. Elena didn't attend either sentencing. She had no interest in watching them fall, took no satisfaction in their suffering. Her only peace came from knowing her boys would never live under Blackwell's shadow, would never know the fear that had defined her marriage. Reverend Cross stepped down from his position, confessing his full past to the congregation with a humility that surprised everyone. Some left the church in disgust. Others, recognizing the courage it took to speak truth, stayed. The congregation eventually called a new minister, but Cross remained in Coulter Springs, working quietly to make amends for years of silence. The town itself transformed. Isaiah and Grace became permanent fixtures in the Morrison household, their friendship a steady anchor through storms of change. Deputy Porter was promoted to sheriff after Garrett retired, married a school teacher from Fort Worth, started building a house on the edge of town. Life moved forward as it always does, carrying them towards something new. One evening in late August, David arrived for dinner with an expression Elena had learned to read: serious, but not troubled, determined, but uncertain. I have something I need to do, his voice carried weight, something I've been avoiding for 3 years, and I don't want to do it alone. What is it? The cabin. David's eyes held hers. Michael's room. I locked that door the day after we buried him, and I haven't really opened it since. Even when I started healing, even when I began to feel alive again, that room stayed frozen. You don't have to face it now, I do. His voice was firm. I want to, but I need you there. Need the boys there. He paused, vulnerability written across every line of his face. I thought maybe if you were willing, we could go up there tomorrow, as a family. The word hung in the air. Family. Not her family that he was joining, not his grief that he was sharing, but something new they were building together. Of course, Elena's voice was steady. We'll go together. The ride up the mountain the next morning felt different from their desperate flight 3 months ago. Summer had transformed the landscape green, replacing white warmth, replacing the bitter cold that had nearly killed them. Ethan rode with David, chattering about everything he saw, his small voice filling the space with life. Liam created elaborate stories about bandits hiding in the rocks, weaving tales that made Nathan roll his eyes, but smile despite himself. Elena rode beside them, watching her sons with David and feeling something settle in her chest, not quite peace, but the beginning of it. The cabin appeared through the trees, smaller than Elena remembered. The graves behind it were tended carefully, wildflowers growing around the crosses in a riot of color. David dismounted slowly, helping Ethan down with gentle hands. For a long moment he stood motionless, staring at the cabin that had been both sanctuary and prison. "Ready?" Elena's voice was soft. No, David's honesty was painful and perfect. "But I'm going to do it anyway." Inside the cabin was exactly as they'd left it, dusty, but preserved, frozen in time. David paused at the locked door, pulling the key from his pocket. His hands trembled as he fitted it to the lock. "You don't have to do this today," Elena said again, giving him the escape she knew he wouldn't take. "Yes, I do." The key turned. The lock clicked. David's hand rested on the doorknob for a long moment before he pushed it open. Sunlight streamed through a small window, illuminating a child's room. The bed was neatly made, covers pulled tight the way a mother's hands would arrange them. Shelves held books and toys, each item placed with care. A rocking horse stood in the corner, its painted eyes bright and expectant. And on a small desk, drawings lay scattered, a child's renderings of horses and houses and a family standing together. David stood frozen in the doorway, his whole body trembling. Elena moved to stand beside him, her hand finding his. "Can we see Ethan's?" Small voice came from behind them, carrying the solemn respect of a child who understood somehow the sacredness of this space. David nodded, unable to speak. Ethan stepped into the room, carefully moving with reverence toward the bookshelf. He liked adventure stories. Ethan observed his fingers tracing the spines. "Just like Liam." "Yes." David's voice was barely audible. "He did, and he liked horses." Ethan touched the rocking horse gently, as if afraid it might break. "Did he ever ride a real one once?" David's voice cracked. "On my saddle. He was so proud, kept telling everyone he was a cowboy. That's a good thing to want to be." Liam and Nathan entered quietly, their usual energy subdued by the weight of memory filling the room. Nathan went to the desk, looking at the drawings with careful attention. "He drew like me," Liam said softly. "Look, this one has a doctor with a bag. That was his father." David touched the drawing with trembling fingers, his voice thick. "He was always drawing me with my medical bag. Wanted to be a doctor when he grew up." For a long while, no one spoke. They simply existed in the space Michael had occupied, honoring his memory with their presence. Then Ethan did something that broke the last of David's careful control. He walked to David and took his hand, looking up with eyes that held understanding far beyond his 5 years. "I'm sorry your boy died." His voice was simple, direct. "But I'm glad you saved me, and I'm glad you're our family now." David dropped to his knees, pulling Ethan into a fierce embrace. His shoulders shook with sobs he had held back for 3 years, grief finally finding release in the presence of people who loved him enough to witness it. Elena gathered Nathan and Liam close, tears streaming down her own face. Nathan's jaw was tight with emotion. He was too young to fully process. Liam's eyes were huge and wet, his usual stories silenced by something bigger than imagination could contain. They stood like that for a long time, a family bound not by blood but by choice, surrounding a grieving father as he finally fully said goodbye. When David lifted his head, his face was ravaged but somehow lighter, as if a weight he'd carried for years had finally shifted. "Thank you." His voice was hoarse. "Thank you for being here, for not letting me do this alone. Where else would we be?" Nathan's voice was gruff with adolescent embarrassment at his own emotion. "You're stuck with us now, Dr. Mercer. Is that so?" "Yes, sir." Nathan's voice steadied. "Morrisons don't abandon family." David looked at Elena, his eyes asking a question she hadn't dared hope he'd voice. "In that case," he said slowly, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket, "I have something to ask all of you." Elena's breath caught. Her heart began to race. "I bought this 2 weeks ago." David's voice trembled. "Been carrying it around, waiting for the right moment. Thought it would be at dinner or on the porch or somewhere romantic." He laughed shakily. "Didn't expect it to be here. But somehow this feels right. Feels honest." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring, elegant in its plainness. "Elena Morrison." His voice steadied, gained strength. "I fell in love with your courage before I fell in love with you. Watched you fight for your children when the whole world turned against you, and I thought, that's the kind of person I want to be. That's the kind of person I want beside me." Tears streamed down Elena's face, but she didn't speak, letting him finish. "I can't promise I'll ever be whole. I'll always carry Catherine and Michael with me. Some days the grief will catch me off guard, but I can promise to love your sons like my own. Promise to stand beside you in every battle. Promise that every day for the rest of my life, I'll try to be worthy of the second chance you've given me. He looked at Nathan, Liam, and Ethan in turn. Boys, I'm asking your permission. I know I'm not your father and I won't try to replace him, but if you'll have me, I'd be honored to help raise you, to teach you, to protect you, to love you. Silence. Then Ethan's voice clear and certain. Does this mean I can call you Pa? A wet laugh escaped David. If you want to. Then yes, from me. Liam was bouncing on his toes, barely containing excitement. I always wanted a Pa who listened to my stories. Yes, from me too. All eyes turned to Nathan, the eldest, the one whose approval mattered most because he remembered Marcus, because he'd been hurt deepest, because his acceptance would mean the most. Nathan stepped forward, his young face serious beyond his 12 years. He extended his hand. Welcome to the family, Pa. David shook the offered hand, then pulled Nathan into a hug. The boy pretended to resist, but leaned into despite himself. Elena, David turned back to her, the ring glinting in dusty sunlight. I believe I asked you a question. She looked at the ring, at her sons, at the room that held so much grief and was now filling with hope. At David's face ravaged by tears, but open in a way it hadn't been when she first met him. Yes. Her voice broke on the word. 1,000 times yes. When David slipped the ring on her finger, when he kissed her with 3 boys making exaggerated gagging sounds, when they all tumbled into an embrace that felt like the beginning of something impossible and necessary, Elena felt what she'd given up believing in. She felt home. Not a place or a building or even the land they'd fought for. Home was this man who'd emerged from grief to save her son. Home was her boys growing stronger every day. Home was the choice to keep loving even when love had hurt her before. They left Michael's room with the door open, not erased, not forgotten, but no longer a shrine to grief. The room would always be there, would always hold Michael's memory, but it was no longer locked away, no longer something to fear or avoid. As they rode down the mountain together, David and Elena on one horse, the boys sharing another, Liam's voice drifted back to them. Are we going to have a wedding? I suppose so. Nathan's voice carried the careful neutrality of a 12-year-old trying not to show excitement. With cake, probably. And can I wear my good shirt if you don't get it dirty before then? I'll try, but I'm not promising anything. Elena laughed, leaning back against David's chest. His arms tightened around her, his breath warm against her temple. No regrets, he asked softly. Not a single one. Elena turned to kiss his cheek. Even with everything we've been through, everything we've lost, because of it, we found this, found each other. Below them, Coulter Springs spread out in the summer sunlight. A town that had rejected her, then embraced her. A community rebuilt on the ashes of corruption. A place where her children would grow up safe and loved and free from the shadows that had haunted her marriage. And beside her, a man who'd learned that grief was not a destination, but a passage. That love could survive loss. That broken hearts could heal given time and care, and the courage to try again. I love you. David said the words coming easily now, without the fear that had once choked them. I love you too. Behind them, the mountain stood sentinel over the graves of Catherine and Michael Mercer. Before them, the future stretched wide and uncertain and full of possibility. And between, on this road between past and future, a family rode toward home. Not perfect, not unbroken, but together, always together. That was the story of Elena Morrison, a widow who refused to surrender. A mother who fought for her children when the world turned its back. A woman who found love in the most unexpected place, a snowbound cabin, a grieving doctor, and a blizzard that nearly killed her but instead gave her life. She had been rejected by a town, betrayed by a husband, abandoned by everyone who should have helped. But in the end, she had been found. She had been chosen. She had been loved. And in the golden light of a Texas summer, surrounded by her sons and the man who had given her hope again, Elena Morrison finally understood what David had meant when he looked at her that first desperate night and said the words that changed everything. You're home now, she was. At last she was.